You ever notice how sometimes, before you even act, your mind's already told you how it's gonna end? Like you walk into a room, and something inside whispers, they're not gonna like you. Or you sit down to start something important, and a quiet voice says, you're probably gonna fail anyway. It's like there's a narrator in your head, and somehow that narrator never shuts up. But here's the twist: that narrator isn't describing your life, it's creating it. Before we continue, a quick note. Many of you watch our videos, but haven't subscribed yet. So please subscribe to our channel Restwise and join our growing community. We'd also love to know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's amazing to see how connected we all are. If you enjoy relaxing with philosophy, psychology, and science while drifting into sleep, give this video a like and stay with us on the journey. Now, let's get back to the video. Most people think thoughts are harmless background noise, just mental chatter. But the truth is, every single thought you repeat becomes a kind of story. And that story turns into identity. You think you're remembering who you are, but really, you're rehearsing who you've decided to be. The brain can't tell the difference between what's vividly imagined and what's real. When you keep telling yourself you're unlucky, awkward, too late, too broken, your mind doesn't argue. It takes the script and starts building the set. Here's where it gets dark. The stories you tell yourself don't always start with you. They start with someone else's voice. A parent who said, "You never listen." A teacher who said, "You're not that smart." A moment when you failed, and your brain decided to protect you by making that failure part of your identity. Those moments calcify. They become narratives that quietly dictate how you love, how you work, how you see yourself. You might be living inside someone else's opinion and not even realize it. Think about this. Let's say as a kid, you got told you're too sensitive. Over time, you start filtering your emotions, thinking being emotional equals being weak. Now as an adult, you shut down before you even feel. You tell yourself, "I just don't care anymore." But that's not true. You care deeply. You just built a story that says caring hurts, so you stopped showing it. This is what's wild about mental habits. They're invisible, but they shape everything you do. Psychologists call this self-narrative identity. It's the idea that we all create a running story that explains who we are, what our life means, and what's possible for us. It's not based on facts, it's based on interpretation. Two people can go through the same event. One says, "That broke me." The other says, "That built me." Same event. Different story, different life. The brain wires itself around whichever version you repeat, and repetition is the real trap. Because once a story's been repeated enough, it stops sounding like a story. It starts sounding like truth. You don't even question it. You just live inside it. You assume it's the way things are, when in reality, it's just the way you've described them. It's like wearing tinted glasses your entire life. You stop noticing the color, but it's changing everything you see. There's a study from Emory University where researchers found that the more coherent a person's life story felt to them, the stronger their sense of purpose and resilience. But here's the catch. It didn't matter whether their story was full of success or failure. What mattered was whether they found meaning in it. Meaning transforms pain into growth. It's like alchemy for the mind. Without meaning, your past becomes weight. With meaning, it becomes fuel. So ask yourself this: What story are you telling yourself right now that you think is fact? Maybe it's, I'm always anxious. Or, I'm just not good with people. Or, I'm never gonna get ahead. When did that story begin? Who taught it to you? Because the moment you question it, you loosen its grip. Most people never do. They keep living the same mental movie on repeat, wondering why life feels like reruns. Let me give you a visual. Imagine you're holding a book, the story of your life so far. You flip through the pages, and every chapter feels familiar. But suddenly, you realize something. The narrator writing this book isn't some objective truth teller. It's just you, or more specifically, the version of you that was trying to make sense of pain. Every insecurity, every limiting belief, every time you said, "That's just who I am." That's the author talking. And you can rewrite it. You can literally edit your own identity. When people start therapy, that's often what's really happening. Not just healing, but rewriting. They begin to see that what they thought was character is actually conditioning. What they thought was personality is actually protection. The stories they've lived by start to crack open. And through those cracks, something new gets in. Choice. But there's a reason we cling to old stories, even the painful ones. They make us feel safe. Familiar pain is easier to carry than unfamiliar freedom. Change requires stepping into a story you haven't proven yet. You have to believe something before there's evidence for it. That's terrifying for the brain. It would rather stay in a story that hurts than risk a story that's uncertain. And that's why awareness is everything. You can't change a story you don't realize you're telling. Start small. Catch yourself in a thought that begins with, "I always," or "I never." Those are narrative clues. They reveal where you've stopped being curious about yourself. Whenever you hear that phrase in your mind, pause and ask, "Says who?" Here's the paradox. You can't silence the narrator. That voice will always talk, but you can change the script it reads from. You can teach it new lines. Instead of "I always mess things up," try, "I'm still learning how to handle this." Instead of "No one ever stays," try, "I'm learning how to choose people who do." It sounds small, almost silly, but your brain records that difference like code. Over time, that new script starts to overwrite the old one. And one day, without even realizing it, you start making choices that match the new story. You show up differently. You speak up when you would have stayed quiet. You take a risk you never thought you could. And it feels natural, like this was who you were all along. But it wasn't. It's who you became when you changed the story you told yourself. That's the hidden habit most people never see. Not their thoughts, but the story their thoughts live inside. Change that, and everything else follows. Subconscious programming. Ever wondered why you keep doing things you swore you'd stop doing? Like you tell yourself you're done with procrastinating, done with doubting yourself, done with overthinking. And yet, a few days later, there you are again, trapped in the same loop. It's like there's this invisible hand steering your choices when you're not even aware of it. That's not a lack of willpower. That's subconscious programming. Here's the hard truth: your conscious mind, the part you think is in control, is barely running the show. Neuroscientists estimate it handles maybe 5% of your daily behavior. The other 95%, that's the subconscious, the automatic, hidden system that quietly decides what feels safe, what feels scary, what's possible, and what isn't. You think you're making choices, but most of the time, you're following instructions written years ago. This programming starts early, from the moment you're born. Your brain is recording everything: tone of voice, facial expressions, the way people around you respond to love, fear, failure. Before the age of 7, your mind is like wet cement. Every repeated experience leaves an imprint. A parent who says, "Be careful," too often doesn't just teach safety, they teach fear. A teacher who praises you only when you get things right doesn't just reward effort, they wire perfectionism. By the time you're grown, those patterns feel like personality. But they're not, they're conditioning. And that conditioning runs deep. When something feels instinctive, like pulling away from attention or hesitating before success, that's not instinct. That's memory. The subconscious remembers what used to hurt and tries to protect you from it, even if it's sabotaging you now. You might say you want success, but if your subconscious associates success with rejection, pressure, or burnout, it'll quietly make sure you never quite get there. That's why people repeat toxic relationships, why they self-sabotage right before things get good, why they freeze up when opportunity shows up. It's not that they want pain, it's that pain feels familiar. The subconscious loves familiarity more than happiness. It would rather keep you stuck in predictable misery than risk unfamiliar peace. Let's make it real. Picture someone who grew up with a parent who was unpredictable. One moment loving, the next distant. That child learns a pattern: love equals uncertainty. Fast forward to adulthood, and they keep finding themselves drawn to partners who make them chase affection. They think it's chemistry. It's not. It's programming. The brain isn't looking for joy. It's looking for what feels known. Now here's where it gets even more interesting. The subconscious doesn't understand language. It understands emotion, repetition, and imagery. That's why affirmations sometimes don't work. You can stand in the mirror and say, "I'm confident," 100 times, but if deep down your emotional body doesn't believe it, the subconscious rejects it. You can't outthink a feeling. You have to rewire it through experience. There's a mechanism in the brain called the reticular activating system. It's basically the filter that decides what information gets your attention. When you repeat a belief, that system starts searching for proof that it's true. Tell yourself, "I always mess things up," and your brain highlights every mistake. Tell yourself, "I figure things out eventually," and it starts spotting solutions you used to miss. It's not magic. It's pattern recognition. Your subconscious literally edits reality to match your dominant story. And the wild part, most of your programming was never your choice. It was absorbed. You didn't decide to fear failure. You saw someone punished for it. You didn't choose to doubt your worth. You learned it through silence, through moments no one noticed you. The subconscious doesn't need words to learn. It just watches, feels, records. And once those emotional recordings are made, they replay automatically until you overwrite them. But overwriting doesn't happen through force. It happens through safety. You can't bully your subconscious into changing. You have to teach it a new normal. The same way it learned fear through repetition, it learns peace through repetition too. That's why consistent small changes work better than massive sudden ones. Each time you act differently. Speak up instead of staying silent. Rest instead of pushing through. You send a new message: it's safe to be different now. Let me give you a simple example. Imagine someone who grew up being told emotions are weakness. Every time they cried, they were dismissed. As an adult, they become emotionally detached. Not because they don't feel, but because feeling wasn't safe. To reprogram that, they don't need to force themselves to cry more. They need to create small, safe moments of expression. Journaling, talking, allowing emotion without judgment. Each repetition tells the subconscious, "We're safe now. This doesn't hurt anymore." Slowly, the wiring starts to shift. You can literally rewire your brain this way. It's called neuroplasticity, the ability of neural pathways to change through repetition and emotion. The more emotionally charged an experience is, the deeper it imprints. That's why trauma programs fast. But that also means joy, gratitude, and love can reprogram fast too, if you let them be felt fully. And here's something people rarely admit: awareness alone isn't enough. You can understand every psychological concept in the world and still act from your old wiring. Knowing the code doesn't rewrite it. You have to embody the new signal. That means catching yourself in a familiar reaction and consciously choosing differently. Even if it feels awkward, even if it feels fake. That's how new neural circuits are built, through discomfort that becomes normal. So when you notice an old pattern showing up, the hesitation, the guilt, the fear, don't shame it. It's not weakness. It's just old programming trying to keep you safe the only way it knows how. Thank it, then update it. Say to yourself, "That used to protect me, but I don't need it anymore." The subconscious listens to emotion more than logic, so say it with conviction. Eventually, your subconscious stops being the enemy. It becomes the ally. It starts working for your new beliefs instead of your old fears. And one day you realize something profound. You're no longer forcing change. You're just being it. The loop ends. The autopilot shifts. And for the first time, your mind and your life start playing the same song. That's subconscious programming. The unseen blueprint shaping every thought, every reaction, every version of you you've ever been. Change that blueprint, and the entire architecture of your life starts to rebuild itself. The voice in your head, you know, that voice that never stops talking. The one that comments on everything. What you're doing, what you should have done, what everyone else is probably thinking. It's like a constant narrator in the background, always analyzing, judging, predicting. Sometimes it's helpful. Most of the time, it's brutal. That's the voice in your head. And whether you realize it or not, it's the single biggest influence on how you feel, what you believe, and who you become. But here's the strange thing. That voice isn't actually you. It sounds like you. It speaks in your language. It even uses your memories as proof. But it's not who you are. It's a mental process, a loop of language and conditioning that developed over time. If you've ever caught yourself having an entire argument in your mind before anything even happened, that's the voice rehearsing control. It's not predicting reality. It's trying to protect you from it. The problem is, that voice doesn't know when to stop protecting. It treats every discomfort like danger. Every moment of uncertainty becomes a potential threat, so it starts spinning, creating explanations, justifications, worst-case scenarios. And you start believing it. You don't question it because it feels familiar. You assume that if the voice is anxious, you must be anxious. If it's angry, you must be angry. But that's not truth. That's fusion. When you and your thoughts become one thing. Here's the shocker. Your brain produces between 60 and 80,000 thoughts per day. Most of them are the same ones you had yesterday. That means the voice in your head is mostly reruns. Recycled stories from your past dressed up as fresh insight. And because it repeats, it feels true. The brain mistakes familiarity for truth. That's why self-doubt can feel like realism. It's just an old thought that's been repeated enough times to sound believable. Think about how that voice talks to you. Would you ever speak to a friend that way? Would you tell someone you love that they're not enough, that they'll never catch up, that they've already failed? Probably not. But you say it to yourself all the time, quietly, automatically. You don't even notice how cruel it is because it's always been there. It's like background noise you've learned to live with. Now here's where it gets deep. That voice developed for survival, not happiness. When you were young, you absorbed voices around you. A parent's criticism, a teacher's tone, a moment of shame. Your brain recorded those moments as rules for safety. The voice in your head became a blend of all those influences. It's not you talking. It's a chorus of the past, trying to make sure you don't get hurt again. That's why sometimes your inner voice sounds like a warning system instead of a guide. It's hypervigilant. It thinks if it can anticipate pain, it can prevent it. But in doing so, it keeps you trapped in constant mental noise. The voice becomes a full-time commentator on things that haven't even happened yet. And the more you argue with it, the louder it gets. So what do? You don't silence it. You observe it. There's a difference between hearing a thought and believing a thought. The moment you can notice the voice without reacting to it, something powerful happens. You create distance. That distance is freedom. When you can hear your thoughts as background chatter instead of commands, you regain choice. Imagine this for a second. You're sitting in traffic, and the voice says, "You're gonna be late again. You always mess things up." Instead of diving into frustration, you catch it. You say to yourself, "There's that voice again." That tiny moment of recognition breaks the trance. You're no longer inside the thought. You're watching it. And once you're the watcher, the voice loses power. It's like realizing the scary movie isn't real once the lights come on. This isn't just some abstract idea. It's neuroscience. The brain's default mode network is the part responsible for self-referential thinking. Basically, the voice that narrates your life. Studies show that when you meditate or practice mindful awareness, activity in that network quiets down. That's why people feel peace during stillness. Not because life changes, but because the inner narrator finally takes a breath. But here's the catch: silence isn't the goal. Awareness is. The voice isn't your enemy. It's like a child trying to protect you using fear. The more you fight it, the louder it screams. The more you listen with understanding, the more it calms down. Instead of saying, "I need to stop overthinking," try saying, "I hear you, but we're safe." It sounds simple, almost too gentle, but it retrains the brain. You're teaching that voice a new tone, compassion instead of panic. Here's something wild. In cognitive psychology, there's a practice called diffusion. The act of separating yourself from your thoughts. One exercise is to add the phrase, "I'm having the thought that," before whatever your mind says. So instead of, "I'm not good enough," you say, "I'm having the thought that I'm not good enough." That small shift reminds your brain that the thought isn't a fact. It's just a thought passing through. And once you see thoughts that way, everything changes. Fear doesn't paralyze you. It just passes. Doubt doesn't define you. It just visits. The voice keeps talking, but you stop obeying. You start making choices based on values instead of mental noise. And slowly, that voice becomes softer, kinder, more like a background hum than a dictator. Here's the beautiful part: the goal isn't to get rid of the voice. It's to realize you were never it. The real you is the awareness behind it, the quiet observer who can watch thoughts come and go without losing yourself in them. That's who you are when the noise fades. That's where clarity lies. So the next time your mind starts spiraling, don't try to win the argument. Just notice it. Smile even. Say, "I see you." Because that's the moment you stop being the voice in your head and start being the one who listens. And that shift, that's where peace begins. The multitasking trap. You ever have those days where your brain feels like a browser with 50 tabs open? Music playing somewhere, messages pinging, 3 unfinished tasks in front of you, and somehow you're scrolling through something completely unrelated. You tell yourself you're being productive. You're juggling it all. But deep down, you feel scattered, drained, unfocused. That's not because you're lazy or bad at time management. It's because you've fallen into the multitasking trap. Here's the thing. Your brain can't actually multitask the way you think it can. It can switch really fast between tasks, but that switching comes at a cost. Every time your focus jumps, your brain has to reorient itself, like shifting gears in a car. It burns energy, it loses momentum, and when you do it over and over again, your attention becomes fragmented. You start mistaking business for progress. Neuroscientists have a name for this task switching cost. Every time you move from one thing to another, there's a cognitive penalty. A few seconds of mental friction, where your brain clears out the old context and loads the new one. It's like constantly rebooting a computer. If you do that all day, you end up exhausted without ever really finishing anything. You worked, but you didn't move. What's wild is that multitasking gives you the feeling of productivity. It triggers tiny dopamine hits, the brain's reward chemical. Each time you check something off, switch tabs, or respond to a notification, it feels like progress, but it's actually just stimulation. That's why multitasking feels addictive. You're not chasing completion, you're chasing the micro rewards of distraction. Here's where it gets deeper. The more you multitask, the worse you get at focusing, even when you want to. Studies from Stanford found that heavy multitaskers have more trouble filtering out irrelevant information and struggle to recall details later. In other words, the more you train your brain to scatter, the harder it becomes to hold attention on anything meaningful. You're literally rewiring your mind for distraction. And this isn't just about work. It bleeds into how you live, how you love, how you connect. You ever catch yourself half listening to someone while checking your phone, nodding at the right moments, but not really there, or starting a meal while thinking about tomorrow's to-do list? That's what the multitasking trap does. It splits your presence. It teaches your mind that being everywhere means being nowhere fully. But here's the real kicker. When you multitask, you don't just divide your attention. You divide yourself. You create multiple unfinished versions of you competing for energy. One part is trying to write, another part is scrolling, another is worrying about messages, and another is mentally replaying something from yesterday. It's like your consciousness is stretched thin across moments that never fully happen. That's why multitasking leaves you tired even when you've done nothing. It's not physical exhaustion, it's cognitive fragmentation. And the scary part, the brain starts craving that chaos. It starts finding silence uncomfortable. Stillness feels like boredom because the dopamine cycle has conditioned you to need constant stimulation. You reach for your phone not because you need it, but because the absence of noise feels like withdrawal. That's how the trap tightens. It turns restlessness into a habit. But let's step back for a second. Why do we multitask in the first place? Deep down, it's not about efficiency. It's about avoidance. We multitask to dodge discomfort. Focusing on one thing means confronting the possibility of failure, boredom, or imperfection. Jumping between tasks gives us the illusion of control. Like if we keep everything moving, nothing can crash. But that's the lie. When everything moves at once, nothing moves deeply. There's a concept psychologists call attention residue. When you switch tasks, a part of your attention stays stuck on the previous one, like a tab that never fully closes. So even if you move on, part of your mental energy is still elsewhere. Multiply that by dozens of switches a day, and your focus becomes a mosaic of unfinished thoughts. You can't create deeply in that state. You can't connect, reflect, or rest. You're living in mental fragments. Now here's what's powerful. The brain can be retrained. Just like multitasking rewires it for chaos, single tasking rewires it for depth. When you give your full attention to one thing, fully, unapologetically, the brain enters a state called flow. Time disappears. Effort feels natural. You lose the sense of performing and start being. That's where clarity and creativity live. But you can't reach that state if your attention is split into pieces. You don't need to become a monk to fix this. Start with tiny moments of singular focus. When you eat, just eat. When you walk, just walk. When you talk to someone, actually listen. No phone, no half presence. Just one thing, fully. At first, it'll feel uncomfortable, like your brain's itching for something else. That's the withdrawal phase. You're detoxing from stimulation, but the more you stay with it, the more peace you start to feel. Because here's the truth most people never realize: your mind doesn't need more input. It needs integration. Every thought, every idea, every feeling you rush past, it needs space to land. Without that space, your life starts to feel like noise. But when you slow down, when you reclaim your attention, things start to make sense again. The chaos quiets. The voice in your head softens. You start to feel present. And that's when life stops being something you're managing and starts being something you're actually living. Multitasking promises control, but what it really gives you is disconnection. From your work, your relationships, your peace. When you stop scattering your attention, you don't lose speed. You gain clarity. You start finishing what matters. You start feeling your own life again. And maybe that's what real productivity actually is. Not doing more, but being fully alive in what you're doing right now. Inherited mental scripts. You ever stop and wonder why certain thoughts or fears feel like they didn't even start with you? Like you're living out patterns that make no logical sense for your life, but they feel baked in, automatic, familiar, unexplainable. Maybe you find yourself constantly worried about money, even when you're doing fine. Maybe you shrink when you speak up, even though no one ever told you not to. Or maybe you keep choosing people who treat you the same way someone once did long before you knew better. That's not coincidence. That's inherited mental scripting. Here's the strange truth. Not every belief or fear in your head is yours. Some of them were passed down wordlessly through family stories, emotional tone, and even biology. You inherited not just your eye color or your height, but emotional codes, unspoken scripts that told you what's safe, what's possible, and what's worth sacrificing. Before you even had a conscious thought, you were already being programmed by the generations before you. Science has a name for part of this epigenetic inheritance. It means that intense emotional experiences, like trauma, scarcity, or loss, can actually change how certain genes express themselves. Those changes don't alter DNA itself, but they do change how it functions, and those changes can be passed on. A grandparent who lived through war or famine may have passed down not just stories of survival, but a nervous system wired to expect threat. So you grow up flinching at life, feeling unsafe in abundance, without knowing why. But not all inheritance is biological. Most of it's psychological. Think about the home you grew up in, not the rules, but the emotional climate. Every sigh, every silence, every argument taught you something. Maybe you learned that love equals sacrifice, or that success makes people jealous, or that emotions get you in trouble. Those lessons weren't spoken. They were modeled, and your subconscious wrote them into the script of who you think you are. Here's where it gets tricky. These scripts rarely sound dramatic. They sound reasonable. Be careful with money. Don't trust people too easily. Work twice as hard to be taken seriously. They sound like wisdom, but what they often are is fear disguised as guidance. They were protective once, but now they limit you. They whisper rules that don't belong to your reality anymore. Imagine this: your grandmother grew up during scarcity. Food was rationed, every penny mattered. She developed a script. Security equals survival. Her child, your parent, grew up absorbing that energy, that constant low-level anxiety around not having enough. So even if they told you, you can be anything you want, you still felt the undercurrent of fear. And now you, years later, can't relax around success. You work hard but never feel safe. That's not your mindset. That's inheritance. It happens with emotions too. If your family avoided confrontation, you likely inherited a script that says peace is more important than truth. So you bottle things up. You smile when you're hurt. You choose harmony over honesty until resentment builds up like pressure in a sealed jar. And when it explodes, you tell yourself you're the problem. But you're not the problem. You're the continuation of a script that taught you silence equals safety. These scripts are powerful because they live beneath awareness. You don't question them. You repeat them. They drive choices, relationships, even self-worth. You might think you're choosing freely, but really, you're reenacting the same old emotional play, just with new characters. The details change, the pattern stays. Here's something to sit with: your ancestors' coping mechanisms were brilliant. They did what they had to do to survive. Their fear kept them alive in conditions you'll never experience. But what was protection for them becomes limitation for you. You're not living in their world anymore. You're carrying instincts that don't match your environment. And that mismatch creates tension. The feeling of being stuck, restless, disconnected from your own story. The first step to breaking an inherited script is awareness. You can't heal what you can't see. Start by noticing your patterns, especially the ones that make no sense for your current life. The unnecessary guilt, the fear of standing out, the belief that joy must be earned. Ask yourself, whose voice is this really? Often, you'll hear echoes of parents, grandparents, or early caretakers. You might even hear cultural voices, generational beliefs about gender, class, race, or worth. These are all lines from the same inherited script. And when you start to see the pattern, something powerful happens. You stop identifying with it. You realize this fear, this doubt, this constant need to prove yourself isn't your personality. It's programming. Once you see that, you gain the power to edit it. Here's a practice that helps when an old pattern shows up. Pause and name it out loud. Say something like, "That's not me, that's the family script." Naming separates you from it. It moves the story from identity to observation. Over time, this creates space, and in that space, you can write something new. But rewriting doesn't mean rejecting your past. It means honoring it while choosing differently. You can thank the people who came before you for their strength, for surviving enough that you even exist, and still decide not to live by their fear. You can say, "I understand why you believed that, but it ends with me." That's how generational healing starts. Not by erasing history, but by ending the repetition of pain. Here's the paradox: when you break the script, it might feel like betrayal at first, because loyalty runs deep. You might feel guilty for wanting more ease, more joy, more freedom than those who came before you had. But that's not betrayal. That's evolution. You're not dishonoring them. You're fulfilling what they couldn't. You're giving their story a new ending. And when you do that, something subtle happens inside you. The anxiety that never quite made sense begins to fade. The guilt loses its grip. You stop reacting from inherited fear and start responding from conscious choice. You begin to live as yourself, not as an echo of everyone who came before. That's the power of seeing your inherited mental scripts for what they are. Old codes written in love and fear that were never meant to be your prison. You can honor the story, learn from it, and still decide to write a new one. Because you're not just the continuation of your lineage. You're its turning point. The negativity bias. You ever notice how one small bad thing can ruin an entire good day? You could get 20 compliments and one piece of criticism, and somehow your brain latches onto the criticism like it's breaking news. You replay it, dissect it, let it live rent-free in your mind for hours, sometimes days. That's not weakness. That's biology. That's the negativity bias. Your brain isn't wired for happiness. It's wired for survival. Thousands of years ago, the humans who were quick to notice danger, the rustle in the grass, the change in someone's tone, the subtle sign of threat, were the ones who lived long enough to pass on their genes. So the modern brain still operates like that, scanning for what's wrong, what could hurt, what could fail. Even when there's nothing chasing you, your nervous system behaves like there is. The problem is, the world has changed. But your wiring hasn't. The ancient brain that once helped you spot predators now hunts for emotional ones. It finds threats in tone, in rejection, in uncertainty. You could be sitting safely on your couch, but your mind will still manufacture danger. It'll replay a mistake, exaggerate a worry, or assume the worst. Not because you're broken, but because your brain thinks it's keeping you safe. Here's the twist: your brain doesn't care if you're happy. It cares if you're alive. So it gives negative information stronger weight. Studies show that negative experiences have about 5 times the emotional impact of positive ones. That's why one failure feels heavier than 10 wins. Your mind is literally built to remember the pain, because forgetting it once meant dying from it later. But in today's world, that ancient survival mechanism becomes a trap. You're not dodging lions. You're dodging emails, opinions, and imagined scenarios. Yet your brain reacts the same way. You wake up and your first thought isn't gratitude, it's worry. You see someone's message and immediately think, "What did I do wrong?" You check your reflection and your attention skips right over what's fine and zooms in on what's flawed. That's the negativity bias doing what it does best, scanning for threat even when life is safe, and the more you feed it, the stronger it gets. Every time you dwell on the bad, you reinforce that neural pathway, literally deepening the brain's habit of focusing on what hurts. Over time, this creates a mental filter. You stop seeing reality and start seeing a distorted version of it, one where danger always feels one step away. Even good things feel temporary. Even peace feels suspicious. But here's the good news. If the brain can be trained to focus on danger, it can also be retrained to notice safety. Neuroplasticity means your brain is always rewriting itself based on what you pay attention to. That's why people who practice gratitude or mindfulness aren't just thinking positive. They're rewiring the bias itself. They're strengthening the neural circuits that notice good, calm, and enough. Let's make it real. Picture a day where 10 things happen, 9 small wins and 1 setback. You get a kind message, finish a task, make someone laugh, enjoy your coffee, hear a song you love, get a small compliment, handle something well, see progress in a project, and then someone criticizes your work. Which one sticks in your mind at night? The criticism. That's the bias in action. But here's the trick when you deliberately focus on the 9 other things. Really feel them, not just list them. You start balancing the scale. It's not pretending everything's fine. It's teaching your brain to stop giving one drop of pain more weight than a bucket of peace. There's a practice researchers call savoring. It means when something good happens, you slow down and take it in for at least 15 seconds. The smell, the feeling, the details, because the brain needs time to register positive experience. Negative ones stick immediately because they trigger the amygdala, the fear center. But positive ones need repetition and attention to sink in. When you linger on a good moment, you're literally installing it into your nervous system. But you have to be intentional. The negativity bias won't disappear just because you understand it. Awareness gives you choice, but practice gives you change. So the next time you catch yourself spiraling, overanalyzing what went wrong, assuming the worst, pause and ask, what's actually okay right now? It sounds simple, almost too small to matter, but that question breaks the loop. It pulls your brain out of threat mode and back into reality. Here's something fascinating. Gratitude isn't just about being thankful. It's about teaching your nervous system that you're safe enough to notice beauty. You can't feel gratitude and threat at the same time. When you truly feel thankful, not performatively, but physically, the body shifts, heart rate slows, muscles release, the mind quiets. You stop surviving and start existing. Now, this doesn't mean you ignore pain. The goal isn't toxic positivity. It's emotional accuracy. The negativity bias doesn't need to be deleted. It just needs balance. You still want your brain to recognize danger when it's real. You just don't want it inventing danger when it's not. You want to live in awareness, not anxiety. Here's the paradox: the negativity bias can actually become your ally if you use it consciously. It teaches you where your wounds still live. It reveals the stories you've been repeating, the fears that still run deep. Every time your mind exaggerates the bad, it's showing you where you're still trying to protect yourself. That's not weakness. That's information. And when you see it that way, even your fear becomes a teacher. The real mastery isn't eliminating negativity. It's learning to notice it without letting it own you. You can see the thought, feel the tension, hear the old story, and still choose differently. You can remind your brain that safety exists right here in this moment. Over time, the bias softens. The mind begins to trust calm. That's when life starts feeling lighter. Not because the world changed, but because your perception did. You stop living in reaction to pain and start responding to reality. The negativity bias will still whisper, still try to warn you, but now you know what it is. A relic from an older world, trying to protect you from things that no longer exist. And when you can meet that voice with awareness instead of fear, you stop being a prisoner of your old wiring. You become the one who rewires it. The attention hijack. Have you noticed how hard it's become to just be? Like really be. To sit in silence without reaching for your phone. To walk somewhere without checking something. To watch a movie without also scrolling through your messages. You tell yourself you're just multitasking, staying connected, staying efficient. But deep down, you feel it. Your attention isn't yours anymore. It's being hijacked, quietly, constantly. Every company, every app, every notification you get is designed to pull your focus. They're not selling products anymore. They're selling attention. And they've learned exactly how to get it. Your phone doesn't just ping, it triggers dopamine. That tiny buzz or flash of red, it's your brain's cue for potential reward. Maybe it's a message. Maybe it's a like. Maybe it's nothing. The uncertainty is the hook. It's the same psychological mechanism that keeps gamblers glued to slot machines. Variable rewards. You never know when the win will come, so you keep checking. Here's the dangerous part. It's not just about distraction. Over time, this rewires your brain. It teaches your mind to crave interruption. Your focus starts to feel uncomfortable. Boredom becomes unbearable. You can't stand the space between stimuli anymore. That's not by accident. That's the result of billions of dollars poured into figuring out how to keep you scrolling, tapping, consuming. Because the longer you stay hooked, the more money you generate. You think you're choosing what to watch, what to read, what to care about, but the algorithms are quietly deciding that for you. They've learned what outrages you, what excites you, what makes you linger just a few seconds longer. That data becomes a map of your psychology, and then it's weaponized, not against you, but against your peace. You're no longer following your curiosity. You're following a trail designed to keep you emotionally charged. Because the more emotional you are, the more predictable you become. The result? You end your day feeling drained, overstimulated, but weirdly unsatisfied. You've consumed a mountain of content but created almost nothing. You've been busy, but not intentional. Your mind feels full, but your soul feels starved. That's the cost of attention hijacking. Not just lost time, but lost depth. You lose the ability to focus long enough to feel something all the way through. And this isn't just mental, it's neurological. Each time you switch tasks or check your phone, your brain releases a hit of dopamine. But it's shallow, tiny bursts that never fully satisfy, so you keep chasing them. Over time, Your brain's baseline for stimulation rises. What used to feel interesting now feels dull. The book you wanted to read, the project you wanted to start, the conversation you wanted to have, they all start to feel like work because they don't deliver instant dopamine. You've been trained for speed, not depth. What's wild is that the same mechanism that steals your attention could also heal it if you use it differently. The brain learns through repetition. If constant stimulation trained you to scatter, intentional stillness can train you to focus again. But you have to fight for it. Because make no mistake, the modern world is built to steal your attention. Every app you use has a team of behavioral scientists behind it. Every color, every sound, every infinite scroll is crafted to bypass your logic and go straight for your instincts. Think about that for a second. Somewhere, someone is paid to figure out how to keep you from closing the app, how to design a world where silence feels wrong. And yet, the things that actually make you feel alive, creativity, love, meaning, they all require the opposite. They need slowness, presence, depth, the very states your attention span is losing access to. So how do you take it back? You start by noticing when your attention isn't a choice anymore. When you pick up your phone without meaning to. When you scroll long past enjoyment. When you reach for distraction the second quiet shows up. That's the hijack. Catching it is the first step. Because every time you notice it, you wake up a little bit more. You shift from being used to being aware. Then create friction. Make it harder to indulge the impulse. Turn off non-essential notifications. Move tempting apps off your home screen. Charge your phone in another room. Your brain loves the path of least resistance. So make distraction inconvenient. When reaching for your phone takes effort, you give your awareness a moment to ask, do I actually want this? That question interrupts the autopilot. But here's where it gets deeper. Reclaiming attention isn't just about removing distractions. It's about remembering what's worth focusing on. Because once you take your attention back, you have to decide what to give it to. Attention is your most valuable currency. Whatever you pay it to grows stronger. Pay it to outrage, and your mind becomes chaotic. Pay it to peace, and your life starts to feel spacious again. Try this. The next time you're doing something simple, making coffee, walking outside, folding clothes, leave your phone alone. Notice the details. The smell, the sound, the rhythm. Your mind will resist at first. It'll crave the next hit of novelty. But if you stay with it, something beautiful happens. The world starts to come back into focus. You start hearing your own thoughts again, not the ones fed to you, but the quiet ones underneath. The ones that actually belong to you, because that's what attention really is. Ownership of your own mind. The ability to decide what matters, what's real, what deserves space inside you. When your attention is scattered, you lose yourself in noise. But when you reclaim it, you rediscover your own signal. You stop being a product in someone else's system and start becoming a person again, one who can think, feel, and choose with intention. The attention hijack isn't just about distraction. It's about disconnection from your creativity, your calm, your clarity. But here's the truth they don't want you to realize. You can't sell the attention of someone who knows where they're looking. The moment you take it back, you become unprogrammable. And that, in this world, is the truest form of freedom. Identity inertia. Ever feel like you've outgrown a version of yourself, but can't quite stop living like that person? You know you've changed. But your habits, your thoughts, the way you show up, they still belong to the old you. It's like you've updated internally, but your external life is still running on an outdated operating system. That's not laziness. That's not fear. That's identity inertia, the force that keeps you tied to who you've been, even when you're ready to become someone new. Identity inertia is what happens when growth collides with familiarity. The human brain loves consistency. It would rather stay in a story that feels predictable than risk a new one that feels uncertain. Even when the old version of you is uncomfortable, it's still known. And the mind equates known with safe. So when you try to step into change, a new habit, a new role, a new mindset, your brain quietly resists. Not because it's against your growth, but because it's protecting your sense of self. Here's what's wild: your identity isn't just who you are. It's who you believe yourself to be. Every time you say, "I'm the kind of person who," you reinforce a self-concept. I'm bad with money. I'm shy. I'm not a morning person. These phrases sound harmless, but they're like code your subconscious runs automatically. Even when you try to change your behavior, your identity code pulls you back to the old baseline. You might start waking up early, but if you still believe you're not a morning person, your brain will find a way to confirm that belief. You'll feel tired, irritable, off balance. That's identity inertia in motion. Psychologists call this cognitive consistency. Your brain wants your actions and your self-image to align. When they don't, it creates discomfort, a kind of internal friction called cognitive dissonance. To get rid of that discomfort, the brain will either change the action or justify it to fit the identity. That's why people self-sabotage right at the edge of transformation. The old identity says, "This isn't who we are," and the body obeys. Here's a simple example. Let's say you decide to get in shape. You start strong for a few weeks, but then you miss a day. That small lapse triggers a familiar thought. See, I always quit eventually. And the moment you believe that, the old identity reclaims control. You didn't fail because you couldn't do it. You failed because deep down, you still saw yourself as the kind of person who doesn't finish things. The behavior was never the problem. The identity was. And it's not just about habits. Identity inertia shows up in relationships too. You might be used to playing the caretaker, the peacemaker, the one who sacrifices. Even when you start setting boundaries, something inside feels wrong, like you're being selfish or cold. That's not guilt, that's dissonance. Your old identity was built around being needed, and now you're rewriting the role. The discomfort you feel isn't proof you're doing something wrong. It's proof you're evolving. What makes identity inertia so sneaky is that it hides inside your success too. Sometimes, the version of you that got you here can't take you where you're going. Maybe you built your life around being the hard worker, the overachiever, the fixer. And that identity got you praise, validation, maybe even love. But now it's suffocating you because you can't relax without guilt. You can't slow down without feeling useless. You're loyal to the identity that once saved you, even though it's now keeping you stuck. Here's the hard truth: every transformation requires a small death. You can't step into a new version of yourself without letting go of who you were. But letting go isn't just emotional, it's neurological. The old neural pathways, the patterns of thought and behavior that defined your past identity, don't just disappear. They fade through lack of use and repetition of the new. That's why change feels awkward at first. You're literally rewiring your brain. The key is to stop trying to become someone else overnight and start practicing being the new identity one small choice at a time. If you want to stop seeing yourself as a procrastinator, don't wait until you're motivated. Act like someone who values momentum. Do one tiny thing, even for 5 minutes. Each action sends a new signal to your brain. This is who I am now. It's not about fake it till you make it. It's about act it until it feels true. Identity inertia weakens when repetition meets emotional evidence. Your brain doesn't change through logic alone. It changes through experience, through moments when the new identity feels real. When you speak up and survive it, when you rest and realize the world didn't fall apart, when you try and don't collapse in shame. Those are the proofs that rewrite your story. Every repetition of a new truth makes the old one less believable. But there's something else you need to know. As you grow, people around you might resist too. Not out of malice, but out of familiarity. They've memorized your old identity, and your change threatens their sense of predictability. They might say things like, "You've changed," or "You're not like you used to be." That's confirmation you're doing something right. They're seeing the identity inertia breaking. Their discomfort isn't your problem to fix. So how do you keep moving forward when the old version of you keeps trying to pull you back? Start by noticing the moments when you're tempted to shrink. Those are invitations to step into your new self. Ask yourself, who am I being right now? The past me or the future me? And then choose. Even one conscious choice starts building momentum. Over time, those moments accumulate and the gravity of the old identity weakens. Eventually, something shifts. The new behaviors stop feeling forced. The new thoughts stop feeling fake. One day, you look around and realize the old story doesn't fit anymore. Not because you fought it, but because you outgrew it. That's when identity inertia turns into identity momentum. And maybe that's what growth really is. Not becoming someone else, but remembering who you were meant to be before life taught you to stay small. You don't need to destroy the old you. You just need to thank them for getting you here, and then gently let them rest. Because the only thing heavier than who you used to be is pretending you still are. Emotional forecasting. You ever notice how much time you spend predicting how you'll feel in the future? Like, once I get that job, I'll finally be happy. Or, if this relationship ends, I'll never be okay. You're constantly running emotional simulations, trying to forecast feelings the same way a weather app predicts rain. But the truth is, your brain is terrible at emotional forecasting. It's one of the biggest illusions shaping your life, quietly steering your choices, your expectations, and your disappointments. The mind craves control. It hates uncertainty. So it tries to feel the future, to guess how happy, sad, or secure you'll be if certain things happen. It's like emotional insurance. You imagine outcomes, run scenarios, and convince yourself you know what they'll feel like. But your predictions are almost always wrong. Not because you're irrational, but because your brain filters the future through the emotions you're feeling now. Think about it. When you're sad, the future looks heavy. When you're anxious, everything feels like a potential threat. When you're hopeful, the same world suddenly feels open. You're not predicting reality. You're projecting your current emotional state onto an imagined one. That's why people often say, "I knew this would make me happy," and then feel empty after getting it. The mind doesn't forecast happiness. It imagines relief. There's a study that shows this perfectly. Psychologists asked people how they'd feel if they won the lottery versus if they became paralyzed. Most predicted they'd be ecstatic for years after winning and devastated forever if they lost mobility. But when researchers followed up, both groups' happiness levels returned almost to baseline within a year. The big events didn't define their emotional climate. Adaptation did. The mind gets used to both joy and pain faster than it expects. That's the problem with emotional forecasting. It assumes your emotions are static, that who you are today will be who you are when that future happens. But your future self isn't living your current life. They'll have different context, experience, priorities, yet you make decisions for them as if they're just you, frozen in time. So you chase dreams that might not fit anymore or avoid risks that could have set you free, all because you're using today's feelings to predict tomorrow's weather. Here's the wild part: emotional forecasting doesn't just mislead your choices. It also feeds your anxiety. When you imagine a painful future, your body doesn't wait to find out if it's real. It reacts now. Your nervous system floods with stress hormones over an event that hasn't happened. Your mind rehearses pain as if repetition could make it hurt less later. But what it really does is make you suffer twice, once in imagination and once in reality, if it ever even happens. And you might think this forecasting helps you prepare, but it rarely does. Because preparation and prediction are not the same. Preparation deals with reality. Prediction deals with fear. When you're predicting, you're trying to feel safe through control. When you're preparing, you're accepting that you can't control, but you can adapt. That's a massive difference. So how do you stop over-forecasting your emotions? You don't have to kill the habit. You just have to get better at noticing when it's happening. Start catching yourself when you say things like, "If this happens, I'll feel blank," or "Once I have this, I'll finally be blank." Those are emotional forecasts. Ask yourself, do I know that? Or am I just guessing? Because most of the time, it's a guess wrapped in certainty. And here's the truth your brain doesn't want to admit: you've been wrong before. You've had moments you thought would destroy you, but they didn't. You've had goals you swore would complete you, but they didn't. You've been surprised by your own resilience, your own adaptability. That's proof that your forecasts are flawed. The human mind underestimates its capacity to recover and overestimates the power of circumstance. You're more elastic than your fears let you believe. Emotional forecasting also shows up in how you delay joy. You tell yourself you'll finally relax after you hit a goal. You'll start living once things settle. You're trying to earn the right to feel peace. A peace that could exist right now if you stopped outsourcing it to the future. You keep postponing happiness to a timeline that never arrives because the goalpost keeps moving. Every time you reach what was supposed to make you feel complete, your brain immediately shifts to the next forecast. Here's what's fascinating. Neuroscience shows that when you imagine a future event, your brain activates many of the same regions as when you experience it, meaning your mind doesn't fully distinguish between memory, imagination, and experience. So, when you constantly simulate your emotional future, you're flooding your system with fake realities. You're living in forecasts instead of presence. That's why it's exhausting. Your body is burning emotional energy on futures that don't exist. But this mechanism isn't all bad. It's the same ability that allows you to dream, to plan, to create. The key is to shift from forecasting emotion to experiencing possibility. Instead of asking, "How will this make me feel?" ask, "What might I learn from this?" The first question anchors you to emotional control. The second opens you to curiosity. One contracts, the other expands. Try this simple exercise. When you find yourself forecasting, imagining how something will feel, good or bad, say to yourself, "I'll find out." It sounds small, but it disarms the illusion of certainty. It gives your future self permission to exist on their own terms. You stop trying to predict their emotions and start trusting their wisdom. You let life surprise you again. And that's the real beauty of dropping emotional forecasting. You rediscover the space for wonder. You stop assuming how everything will feel and start allowing it to unfold. The highs become richer because you didn't pre-script them. The lows become softer because you didn't rehearse them. You realize that the future doesn't need your emotional prediction. It needs your presence when it arrives. Because the truth is, the future isn't waiting to deliver your happiness or your heartbreak. It's waiting for your awareness. And the moment you stop forecasting your feelings and start living your experience, you stop being a fortune teller of imagined pain and start being a witness to real, unfolding life. Comfort in limitation. Have you ever noticed how easy it is to cling to limits that secretly keep you safe? You tell yourself things like, "I'm just not that kind of person," or "That's not really my lane," or "I could never do that." On the surface, it sounds humble, grounded even. But underneath, it's comfort disguised as honesty. Because those limits, they protect you. They keep you from the unknown. They let you stay small while feeling justified. And that's what makes them so seductive. That's comfort in limitation. The quiet addiction to staying inside boundaries you didn't even choose. It's not laziness. It's not weakness. It's safety. Your brain's number one job is to keep you alive, not fulfilled. So it learns early on what feels dangerous. Not just physically, but emotionally. Maybe as a kid, being bold got you rejected. Maybe failing once made you feel worthless. Maybe standing out drew criticism. So your mind built invisible fences around those memories and labeled them off limits. You don't even see the fences anymore. You just feel the edge of them. That's why you stop yourself before you even try. The limitation isn't real. It's inherited fear. What's tricky is that limits feel like truth. You don't say, "I'm afraid to write." You say, "I'm not a writer." You don't say, "I fear rejection." You say, "Dating's just not for me." The wording changes the emotion. It transforms fear into identity. And once a limitation becomes part of who you think you are, it no longer feels optional. You start defending it. You'll find logical reasons to stay small. Too busy, too old, too late. Anything to avoid the risk of being wrong about yourself. And here's the hard part. The longer you live inside those limits, the more comfortable they feel. You start building a life that doesn't challenge them. You surround yourself with people who reinforce them. You design your days so you never have to test whether they're true. That's how limitation turns into comfort. It's not a cage with bars. It's a room you've decorated. You've hung art on the walls, added soft lighting, and convinced yourself you like it there. Because outside that room is the unknown, and the unknown to the brain always feels dangerous. But the danger isn't the unknown, it's the stagnation. Because the same walls that protect you also shrink you. The same routines that keep you stable slowly drain your aliveness. There's a quiet kind of pain that comes from being too comfortable. The ache of unrealized potential. It's subtle, but it's there. You feel it as restlessness, as boredom, as the sense that something's missing even when life looks fine. That's your deeper self knocking from the inside, whispering, "There's more, but you're too comfortable to reach for it." You can feel this most clearly when life forces you beyond your comfort zone. A breakup, a layoff, a big move. Those moments that feel like collapse are often just your soul pushing you past the edge of an old limit. You resist it at first, panic, doubt, denial. But then something surprising happens. You adapt, you stretch. You realize you were capable all along. And that's when you see it, the walls were never real. They were just familiar. The psychology behind this is fascinating. The brain is constantly running cost-benefit analysis. Not consciously, but instinctively. It compares the potential reward of growth with the perceived threat of discomfort. The moment discomfort feels greater than reward, your nervous system shuts it down. That's why even exciting opportunities can trigger resistance. You're not afraid of success, you're afraid of the emotional risk it carries. The possibility of failure, rejection, or exposure. But here's the truth. You can't grow without discomfort because growth and safety live on opposite sides of the same door. Comfort in limitation also explains why people often sabotage their own progress. You start doing better, healing, evolving, succeeding, and suddenly you feel uneasy. You tell yourself you're overwhelmed or unready, and you pull back. That's not self-sabotage. That's self-protection. Your nervous system is trying to restore balance, to bring you back to the familiar zone of safety, even if that safety is small. It's the mind saying, "We've gone too far from what we know." But what you call too far might actually be the beginning of freedom. Here's something powerful: your limits aren't boundaries of capability. They're boundaries of belief. You think they're fixed, but they shift every time you act against them. Every time you do something small that the old you wouldn't dare to, the edges expand. You don't have to destroy the whole wall at once. Just find one brick you can move. That's how you outgrow limitation, not through force, but through gentle disobedience. Try this. The next time you catch yourself saying, "I can't," replace it with, "I haven't yet." That tiny change keeps possibility alive. Or ask yourself, is this a real limit or a comfortable story? Because comfort and truth rarely live in the same sentence. If you feel relief when you justify a limit, that's not truth. That's fear dressed as logic. What makes this hard is that comfort feels good until it doesn't. It's like warm water that slowly cools without you noticing. One day you wake up and realize the water's gone cold. You're still sitting in it because getting out means facing the chill of change. But here's the thing: the chill doesn't last forever. Once you step out, your body adjusts, your mind opens, and suddenly you feel alive again. There's a kind of peace that doesn't come from comfort. It comes from capability, from knowing you can handle what's outside your limits. That peace is earned through friction, not ease. It's the calm that says, even if it's uncomfortable, I'll be okay. That's real confidence. Not the loud kind, but the quiet trust built by stretching yourself again and again until growth feels natural. You don't have to destroy your comfort zone. You just have to stop worshiping it, because the comfort you defend today might be the cage you outgrow tomorrow. And if you really think about it, the moments you're most proud of, the ones that changed you, didn't happen when you felt safe. They happened when you crossed the line you swore you couldn't. So, maybe the goal isn't to eliminate limitation, but to stop finding comfort in it. To start getting comfortable with stretching instead. Because the edge, that place between safety and growth, that's where life actually happens. That's where you stop being who you were and start becoming who you're meant to be. Emotional loops. You ever catch yourself replaying the same thought over and over again, like your mind's stuck on a scratched record? Maybe it's something you said, something someone did, or something you wish you could undo. You keep circling it, analyzing it, feeling it again and again. But it never resolves. That's not reflection. That's an emotional loop, a mental echo that traps you in repetition, convincing you're processing something when you're actually just reliving it. Emotional loops start as an attempt to understand. The mind wants closure. It wants to make sense of pain, confusion, or loss. So it replays the moment, hoping that this time it'll feel complete. But the brain doesn't realize it's reinforcing the same neural pattern. Each repetition strengthens the loop. You end up stuck not because you lack answers, but because your body has learned to find familiarity in the emotion itself. The sadness, the anger, the regret, they start to feel like home. That's what makes emotional loops so deceptive. They feel productive. You think, I'm just trying to figure it out. But what you're really doing is recycling the same emotional state under a different excuse. The brain mistakes rumination for resolution, and your nervous system gets hooked on the chemical cocktail of the feeling. It's like emotional muscle memory. You keep returning to the same tension because it's what your system knows how to hold. Here's the wild part: the loop isn't about the situation anymore. It's about the feeling. The mind keeps revisiting the memory because the body hasn't finished processing the emotion tied to it. You're not addicted to the story. You're addicted to the state it creates. That's why you can know something logically. It's over. I've moved on. It's fine. And still feel pulled back emotionally. The loop is running deeper than thought. It's stored in your nervous system. Science has a name for this: emotional persistence. When an emotion isn't fully felt or expressed, the body holds on to it. The amygdala, your brain's emotional alarm center, keeps signaling the memory as unresolved, so your conscious mind keeps circling back. You're not weak for looping. You're unfinished. Your brain's trying to complete a story that your body still feels open-ended. But here's where the trap deepens. The longer you stay in the loop, the more your brain confuses the emotion for identity. You start saying, I feel hurt, and start saying, I am hurt. You stop saying, I feel anxious, and start saying, I am anxious. That shift from feeling to being is the moment a temporary emotional state becomes a long-term self-concept. You've built a personality around a wound, and the loop keeps feeding it. This is why certain thoughts are so sticky. They're emotionally charged. The mind doesn't obsess over things that mean nothing. It loops around moments where you lost control, where you felt powerless, where your nervous system froze and never fully came back online. It's not your intellect that's stuck, it's your physiology. You're trying to think your way out of something that needs to be felt out. So what actually breaks an emotional loop? Awareness, not analysis. The moment you realize you're looping, you're already one step out of it. Because the loop thrives on unconscious repetition. It feeds off autopilot. When you pause and notice, "Oh, I'm replaying that again," you interrupt the pattern. You move from being in the emotion to observing it. That's the shift that gives you back choice. The next step is to change how you respond to the loop. Most people try to silence it, distract, rationalize, suppress. But that only drives it deeper. The key isn't to fight the loop, it's to complete it. When the thought arises, don't follow the story. Feel the emotion underneath it. If the thought is, "Why did they leave me?" drop the question and ask, "What am I actually feeling right now?" Sadness, fear, anger. Let it move through your body, the tight chest, the lump in the throat, the heaviness in the gut. Emotions are meant to pass. It's resistance that traps them. There's neuroscience behind this. Studies on emotional regulation show that when you name what you feel, literally label it in words, the amygdala calms down. It's called affect labeling. By naming the feeling instead of analyzing the story, you deactivate the brain's alarm system and signal safety. Safety is what allows the loop to finally release. But breaking loops isn't about a single breakthrough. It's a retraining of attention. Because your brain's learned that looping equals control. It's convinced that if it keeps thinking, it can prevent pain from happening again. The irony is, the loop itself is the pain. You can't outthink emotional uncertainty. You can only out-feel it. Here's a practice to try. When you notice yourself looping, pause and ask 3 things first. What emotion am I avoiding right now? Second, where do I feel it in my body? Third, what would happen if I just allowed it? Most loops dissolve the moment you stop fighting to understand them and start letting yourself feel what they've been protecting you from. Sometimes that's grief. Sometimes it's disappointment. Sometimes it's the simple truth that you can't control what happened, only what happens next. And here's something powerful. The opposite of an emotional loop isn't closure. It's movement. You don't need every answer to let something go. You just need to stop circling the same question. Closure isn't a thought. It's a shift in energy. It's when your nervous system finally believes it's safe to move forward. When that happens, you'll notice something subtle. The thought that once had a grip on you will still appear, but it won't pull you in anymore. It'll just pass through like background noise. That's when you know the loop is broken, not because it disappeared, but because you stopped mistaking it for truth. And maybe that's what healing really is. Not erasing the loops, but outgrowing their pull. Learning to recognize the patterns that once defined you and saying, "Not this time." Because freedom doesn't come from controlling your emotions. It comes from no longer being controlled by them. And when you finally step out of that loop, the silence you feel afterward isn't emptiness. It's space. Space where your real life can finally begin to move again. The distraction habit. You ever notice how the second you feel even slightly uncomfortable, your hand reaches for your phone without thinking? A moment of silence, a hint of boredom, a tiny flicker of anxiety, and suddenly you're scrolling, checking, watching, consuming. It's automatic. It's not even a choice anymore. That's the distraction habit. The invisible reflex to escape from your own mind every time it gets quiet enough to hear itself. It starts small. You tell yourself you're just taking a break, or you'll check something real quick. But underneath, distraction has become emotional regulation. You're not checking your phone. You're checking out of your thoughts. You're not watching something. You're avoiding something. Distraction becomes the modern way of self-soothing, except instead of calming you, it scatters you. The real trick of distraction isn't that it steals your focus. It steals your presence. It replaces aliveness with activity. You feel busy but hollow, stimulated but numb. You scroll through endless content, but none of it lands deeply enough to feed you. Because what you're chasing isn't entertainment. It's relief. Relief from the friction of being human, from the discomfort of stillness, from the awkwardness of feeling. The brain learns this fast. Every time you distract yourself and feel temporary relief, your nervous system logs that as a solution. Bored, check your phone. Sad, watch something. Overwhelmed, scroll. The cycle reinforces itself until distraction becomes instinct. You're not even choosing it anymore, it's choosing you. That's the point where it stops being a habit and becomes a loop, one designed to protect you from your own inner world. And it's not your fault. The modern world is engineered for this. Every app, every feed, every ping is a tiny dopamine slot machine. Uncertainty is the hook. Maybe this next scroll, this next message, this next video will give you the hit. The system feeds your brain novelty, not meaning. It teaches you to crave stimulation over satisfaction. So you end up overstimulated and undernourished, constantly consuming but rarely connecting. The scary part is how distraction rewires your relationship with silence. The moments that used to restore you, waiting in line, sitting in traffic, lying in bed before sleep, are now filled with noise. You've lost your inner stillness, and with it, your ability to reflect. And when you can't reflect, you can't integrate. The lessons, the emotions, the insights that help you grow, they need space to land. But distraction keeps that space crowded. There's a reason silence feels uncomfortable now. Stillness exposes what's been waiting underneath. The thought you've been avoiding. The emotion you haven't processed. The truth you don't want to confront. Distraction keeps those things at bay. It convinces you that staying busy is the same as being okay. But if you ever stop long enough, the noise in your head rushes in. And that's the moment most people run back to their screens. Here's something few people realize: distraction is a form of fear. Not of failure or pain, but of presence. Being present means facing reality exactly as it is, without escape routes. And that's terrifying for a mind that's used to constant movement. Because presence demands that you feel. It demands that you sit with your boredom, your sadness, your uncertainty, without fixing or fleeing. That's where the real growth happens, but it's also where most people check out. Neuroscience backs this up. When your brain is constantly stimulated, your default mode network, the part responsible for self-reflection and creativity, becomes weaker. Your mind loses its ability to wander productively. That's why you feel less imaginative, less inspired, less connected. The same habits that protect you from discomfort also steal your depth. You end up living in the shallow end of your own mind. But here's the twist. The discomfort you're avoiding is the doorway back to clarity. When you resist distraction long enough to actually feel your restlessness, something shifts. The anxiety that once felt unbearable starts to soften. Beneath it, you find awareness. Raw, quiet, real. That's where you reconnect with yourself. Not through more input, but through less. breaking the distraction habit doesn't mean cutting off all stimulation. It means retraining your nervous system to tolerate stillness again. Start small. Leave your phone in another room when you eat. Drive without music for 5 minutes. Let silence stretch before you fill it. You'll feel the pull, that restless itch that says, "Do something." But if you breathe through it, you'll notice the urge rise and fall like a wave. That's your brain learning that nothing bad happens when you're still, and something beautiful happens next. You start to hear your real thoughts again. Not the ones fed to you by headlines or algorithms, but the quiet ones beneath the noise, the ones that sound like intuition, truth, creativity. You start remembering what it feels like to think for yourself, to feel your life instead of just scrolling through it. Distraction is easy, depth is earned. Every time you choose presence over escape, you reclaim a piece of yourself. You rebuild focus. You rebuild patience. You rebuild intimacy with your own inner world. The world doesn't need you to be constantly informed. It needs you to be awake. So the next time your hand reaches for your phone out of habit, pause. Ask yourself, what am I trying not to feel right now? Then, instead of escaping it, stay. Let the silence stretch. Let the emotion surface. Let yourself be here, because what you're running from is never as heavy as the weight of never meeting yourself. The truth is, distraction will always be available, but presence, real, grounded awareness, that's rare. That's the part of you that's alive beneath the noise. And if you can learn to find comfort in stillness instead of escape in distraction, you won't just break a habit. You'll remember what it feels like to be fully human again. The belief loop. You ever wonder why some thoughts keep circling your mind like they own the place? Why, no matter how much you try to think differently, you end up back at the same story, the same fear, the same self-doubt, the same emotional echo that feels like truth. That's not random. That's the belief loop, the invisible system that keeps your life running on repeat. Even when you swear you're changing, a belief loop starts with a single assumption, an idea about yourself or the world that feels true enough to stop questioning. Maybe it's something like, people always leave, or I'm not enough, or good things never last. At first, it's just a thought, but thoughts repeated often enough become filters. You stop seeing the world as it is and start seeing it through that lens. Once the belief takes root, it starts shaping your perception. Your brain, desperate for consistency, begins scanning for evidence to prove it right. This is confirmation bias in action, the mind's way of protecting its version of reality. You ignore what contradicts the belief and magnify what reinforces it. You interpret neutral events as proof. Someone doesn't text back fast enough. Proof they're losing interest. You stumble at work. Proof you're not good enough. The loop tightens. Now comes the dangerous part, emotion. Every belief carries an emotional signature. The thought, I'm not enough, isn't just mental, it's felt. It carries shame, insecurity, maybe anxiety. That emotional charge is what anchors the belief. So every time something triggers it, your body reacts as if it's proof. The emotion becomes evidence. You don't even need real-world confirmation anymore. The feeling is the confirmation. And then behavior follows, because what you believe about yourself dictates what you allow, what you pursue, what you tolerate. If you believe you're unworthy, you'll subconsciously choose situations that reinforce that story. You'll shrink when you should speak up, settle when you should walk away, hide when you should show up. the outcome. More experiences that prove your belief right. And just like that, the loop completes itself. Thought, emotion, behavior, result. Back to thought again. This is why change feels so hard. You're not fighting a single thought, you're fighting a closed circuit. The belief creates the emotion drives the behavior produces the evidence, and the evidence reinforces the belief. You can't think your way out of it because the loop isn't logical, it's emotional. But here's the thing, belief loops are not truth. They're patterns, and patterns can be rewritten. The key isn't to attack the belief directly. That just strengthens it. The key is to interrupt the loop at the level of awareness. You have to catch it in motion. Start with curiosity. The next time you feel triggered or discouraged, pause and ask, what would I have to believe right now for this to feel true? That question pulls the loop into the light. Because most of the time, you're not reacting to reality. You're reacting to your interpretation of it. When you can see the belief, you create distance from it. You move from being inside the loop to observing it. Neuroscience shows that awareness weakens old neural pathways. When you notice a belief without automatically reacting to it, the brain's predictive model gets disrupted. It can no longer assume the same emotional response will follow, so the loop starts to lose power. This is called prediction error, the gap between what the brain expects and what actually happens. That gap is where change begins. But awareness alone isn't enough. You have to create new evidence. The only way to truly rewrite a belief is to behave in a way that contradicts it. If your belief says, I'm not capable, do something small that proves otherwise. Not grand gestures, small wins. Because your nervous system needs to feel safe while updating the story. Each small contradiction builds momentum. Each moment you act against the old loop, you weaken its grip. Here's what most people miss. Your brain doesn't believe what you tell it. It believes what you demonstrate. You can affirm, I'm enough, all day. But if your actions say, I'm afraid to be seen, the brain believes the action. That's why change feels so uncomfortable. You have to behave differently before you believe differently. You have to step out of the loop without proof. And this is where faith, not blind faith, but embodied faith, comes in. Faith is the decision to act as if a new story is true long enough for your body to believe it. You don't wait until you feel confident to speak up. You speak up until confidence becomes your new baseline. That's how the loop rewires itself. Thought follows action, not the other way around. You can see this in any area of life. The person who believes love never lasts unconsciously sabotages closeness to avoid being hurt, and then says, see, it always ends. The person who believes success is impossible procrastinates until failure proves them right. It's not fate, it's feedback. The loop is just showing you what you've been practicing believing. So if you want to change your life, stop trying to think positive and start tracking your loops. Notice which emotions keep pulling you back, which stories you replay when you feel small, which outcomes you keep recreating. Every pattern you repeat is protecting a belief, even if that belief hurts you. Breaking the belief loop isn't about force. It's about awareness, compassion, and deliberate contradiction. You can't bully your way into a new mindset. You have to gently teach your brain that another reality is possible, one small experience at a time. And eventually, something beautiful happens. The old thought pops up, but it doesn't sting anymore. The emotion fades faster. the behavior shifts naturally. That's when you know the loop is dissolving. Not because you replaced it with a fake positive story, but because you finally stopped feeding the old one. Every belief loop starts with protection, your mind trying to keep you safe from pain, rejection, or loss. But safety without growth becomes a prison. The walls aren't real, they're recycled stories, and the moment you realize you can rewrite them, you stop living on repeat and start living on purpose. Because the truth is, you're not your beliefs. You're the awareness behind them. The observer that can see the loop spinning and still choose differently. And once you see that clearly, the loop can't trap you anymore. It only keeps running if you keep believing it's you. Self-labeling. It's wild how fast the human mind rushes to label itself. You mess something up once and suddenly you're saying, "I'm such an idiot." You struggle to focus and it becomes, "I have a terrible attention span." You pull away when you're hurt and decide, "I'm just not good at relationships." Without even realizing it, you start turning temporary experiences into permanent identities. That's self-labeling, the quiet way we carve limitation into our sense of self, and then live as if it's truth. It doesn't start maliciously. Labels begin as shortcuts. The brain is obsessed with certainty, so it loves clean definitions. It wants to know who you are, what you can do, and where you fit. It's comforting to say, "I'm an introvert," or "I'm not creative," or "I'm a perfectionist." Labels give structure. They make the chaos of existence feel a little more organized. But over time, those labels stop describing you and start defining you. They go from being language to being identity. The problem is, every label has an invisible boundary. Once you accept it, your mind starts filtering reality to protect it. If you believe you're bad with money, you'll subconsciously avoid opportunities to learn about it. If you believe you're socially awkward, you'll enter conversations expecting discomfort. The label becomes a lens, and the lens becomes your world. Your actions start to match the story, and before long, the story starts to look like fact. Psychologists call this self-consistency theory. The idea that once we form an identity, we unconsciously behave in ways that preserve it. The mind values internal harmony over external accuracy. So even when a label hurts us, we keep living inside it because it feels familiar. That's why you can outgrow a version of yourself but still act like it's who you are. You're not being stuck. You're being consistent. The truth is, most of our self-labels didn't even come from us. They were assigned early, by parents, teachers, culture, peers. Maybe someone told you you were the responsible one, the quiet one, or the dramatic one, and you internalized it, not because it was true, but because it helped you belong. Every label carries social currency. It signals who you are in a group. You wear it to stay accepted. The cost, though, is individuality. The moment you label yourself, you stop exploring the parts that don't fit inside the label. That's why self-labeling feels safe, but suffocating. It's the comfort of knowing who you are, mixed with the quiet ache that maybe you're more than that. You can feel it when life starts pulling you towards something new. A dream, a passion, a side of you that contradicts the old identity. The mind panics. "That's not me," it says. "I don't do that." But maybe you do. Maybe you always could. The only thing standing between who you are and who you could be is the story you keep repeating about yourself. Here's the paradox: the stronger your label, the smaller your freedom, because the moment you decide who you are, you also decide who you're not. If you say, I'm a realist, you unconsciously dismiss imagination. If you say, I'm a mess, you stop striving for order. If you say, I'm an overthinker, you stop practicing stillness because the label gives you permission not to try. Self-labeling is how the ego protects its identity, even when that identity is built on pain. Neuroscience shows this too. Every time you repeat a self-descriptor, I'm lazy, I'm anxious, I'm broken, you're strengthening neural pathways that tie that language to your sense of self. The brain doesn't distinguish between description and instruction. It hears the label as a command, act this way. That's why identity-based statements are so powerful, for better or worse. You're literally programming your behavior through language. So what happens if you start loosening those labels? You don't need to replace I'm lazy with I'm motivated. You just replace it with curiosity. Sometimes I struggle with energy. See how that opens space. Instead of defining yourself, you describe your experience. You move from identity to observation. The moment you shift from I am to I notice, you break the spell. Because that's what self-labeling really is. A spell. A sentence you cast so many times it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Breaking it doesn't mean denying who you are. It means remembering you're not finished becoming. You're fluid. You're evolving. You're allowed to contradict your past selves. You're allowed to surprise yourself. Think about how often you use the phrase, I am. Every time you say it, you're building identity architecture. So choose your words like you're building a house you have to live in. If you keep saying, I'm bad at this, you're building a wall. If you say, I'm learning this, you're building a door. One keeps you contained. The other lets you grow. Here's a simple practice. Start noticing your I am statements for one day. Don't correct them. Just notice. I'm so tired. I'm so stupid. I'm so behind. Notice how many are judgments, not truths. Most of them are just moments, not identities. The more you observe them, the more you'll realize. You don't think your labels think you. They run your behavior until you see them clearly enough to take the wheel back. And here's the part most people miss. You don't have to erase all labels. Some labels empower you. I'm resilient. I'm creative. I'm kind. The key is flexibility. The moment a label stops expanding you and starts restricting you, it's time to let it go. The healthiest identity is a living one, not a title carved in stone, but a story you can rewrite as you evolve. Because the truth is, who you are isn't a list of traits. It's an ongoing relationship with yourself. It's fluid, messy, and ever-changing. You don't need to label it. You just need to live it. So the next time you catch yourself saying, "That's just who I am," pause. Ask yourself, is that who I am, or just who I've been? Because if the label doesn't make you lighter, it's not your truth. It's your cage. And you don't have to keep living inside a word that no longer fits the person you're becoming. Thought, emotion, feedback. Have you ever noticed how a single thought can spiral into a storm of feeling, and how that feeling loops back to reinforce the thought again? You think, I'm going to fail, and suddenly your chest tightens, your stomach churns, your mind races, and that emotional surge makes the thought feel even more true. That's the essence of thought, emotion, feedback. The invisible cycle that wires your mind to repeat the same patterns over and over, often without you realizing it. It starts small. Thoughts are fleeting at first, like whispers in your mind. But the second emotion attaches, the brain treats the thought like a signal, not just an idea. Fear, shame, excitement, longing. Any emotional charge amplifies the thought, turning it from a casual observation into a rule your nervous system follows. The emotion is the glue that cements the thought in place. Suddenly, a single idea becomes a story you keep retelling yourself, one that feels like reality. And here's the tricky part: it doesn't matter if the thought is true. The loop operates on perceived truth. If your mind interprets a situation as threatening, even inaccurately, the emotional system reacts as if it's real. Your body responds. Heart rate rises, muscles tense. Hormones flood your system. That physical signal, in turn, validates the thought. You end up in a feedback loop where your brain and body are convincing each other of a reality that might not exist at all. The pattern explains a lot about human behavior. Anxiety, self-doubt, obsession, and even motivation are all fueled by thought, emotion loops. Someone who believes they're unlovable feels rejection everywhere, reinforcing the belief. Someone who worries they'll fail procrastinates, then panics, and tells themselves again, "I can't do this." Every iteration strengthens neural pathways that make the loop automatic. It's not laziness or weakness. It's conditioning. Psychology calls this reinforcement through affective experience. Essentially, the more your thought triggers a strong emotional response, the more entrenched it becomes. The brain learns to prioritize it because it believes the emotional intensity signals importance. That's why negative thoughts stick more stubbornly than positive ones. Fear, shame, and anger are more memorable to the nervous system than calm, neutral experiences. But there's a hidden power in this system. The same feedback loop that reinforces negative patterns can also be used to strengthen positive ones. Joy, gratitude, confidence, curiosity. If you link thought and emotion intentionally, you create feedback that works in your favor. A single empowering thought, when paired with a genuine emotional experience, gets encoded just as strongly as the negative ones. You can literally retrain your brain by choosing which loops you nurture. Here's where it gets practical. Step 1 is awareness. You have to notice when a thought sparks an emotional reaction and observe the chain thought, feeling, response. Most of the time, we act in autopilot. The thought hits, the feeling hits, and we react without reflection. Awareness interrupts the loop. When you can pause and recognize, that thought just triggered fear, and the fear is making it feel real. You create the space to choose differently. Step 2 is conscious intervention. Change the response before the loop completes. If the thought is, "I'm not capable," and it triggers tension, take a deliberate action that contradicts it. A small task you can complete, a kind word to yourself, a mindful breath. The goal isn't to eliminate the thought. It's to rewire the emotional feedback so that the thought doesn't automatically dictate your state. Step 3 is repetition. The nervous system learns through consistent experience. Every time you pair a thought with a new, healthier emotional response, you weaken the old loop. You're not just thinking differently, you're feeling differently in response to the thought. Over time, the loop rewires itself. The same trigger that used to spiral you into anxiety or doubt now evokes calm or curiosity instead. Here's the fascinating thing. Thought, emotion feedback explains why small mental shifts feel almost miraculous. A tiny change in perspective can completely alter your experience of a situation. because the emotion that used to escalate it no longer feeds the thought. Your mind stops fueling itself. You break the loop, and suddenly the world seems different, not because it changed, but because your internal circuitry did. But it also explains why the opposite happens when you ignore it. If negative thoughts and intense feelings go unexamined, the loop grows stronger faster and more automatic. You end up trapped in patterns that feel like destiny, even though they're really just repeated wiring. You don't see the chain, so it feels like who you are, when in reality, it's just a reinforced process you can learn to disrupt. The key takeaway is that thought-emotion feedback is neither inherently good nor bad. It's neutral. It's a mechanism, a pattern, a loop. What makes it dangerous or empowering is which loops you choose to feed. Fear and doubt are sticky, but so are courage and gratitude. Awareness gives you the lever, action gives you the rewiring. Imagine living where your thoughts and emotions support each other instead of fighting. Where every worry doesn't become a downward spiral, but a signal you can interpret and redirect. Where joy multiplies because the emotion reinforces the thought, and the thought reinforces the emotion. That's not fantasy. That's the same loop working in your favor, once you learn to guide it. Thought-emotion feedback is the hidden architecture of your inner life. Every belief, every fear, every spark of motivation runs through it. The moment you understand the loop, you stop being a passive participant. You become the conductor. You choose which mental music plays and how it resonates through your body. And when you take control, the patterns that once trapped you become the very tools you use to create the person you want to be. Self-criticism habit. You ever notice how easy it is to rip yourself apart over the smallest things? A minor mistake at work, a tiny social slip, a moment of procrastination, and suddenly your inner voice is in full attack mode. You replay it, analyze it, punish yourself over and over. That's not just guilt or regret. That's the self-criticism habit. A silent, relentless loop that convinces you that tearing yourself down is normal, deserved, even productive. It doesn't start mean. Most of the time, self-criticism masquerades as motivation. The voice says, you need to do better. You can't let this happen again. You have to fix this. At first, it feels practical, constructive even. But here's the catch: the brain doesn't distinguish constructive from destructive when it comes to repetition. Every time you replay judgment with intensity, the pattern strengthens. The voice becomes automatic. It moves from guidance into identity. You're no longer just critiquing behavior. You're critiquing yourself. That's what makes it sticky. Self-criticism is addictive. The nervous system interprets harsh inner commentary as attention. Your brain learns that focusing on flaws is important. Anxiety, shame, and regret trigger cortisol, the stress hormone, which floods the system. The body starts associating self-attack with vigilance, and vigilance feels useful. Even though it's painful, your system thinks, this keeps me safe, this keeps me alert. And it's everywhere. You see it in perfectionism, procrastination, low self-esteem, and social withdrawal. That inner voice whispers constantly, not enough, never enough. Even when you succeed, it minimizes the victory, rewires the emotional response to default dissatisfaction, and keeps you striving, not out of growth, but out of fear of inadequacy. The habit hijacks ambition, twisting it into self-punishment. Psychology explains this through a concept called internalized critique. Early experiences shape the voice. Maybe authority figures, peers, or family members gave implicit or explicit feedback that you weren't enough, that mistakes were shameful, or that your value depended on performance. The brain internalizes these messages and turns them inward. Over time, it no longer needs external judgment. The habit runs automatically. Your inner critic becomes both teacher and tormentor. Here's what's tricky: self-criticism feels familiar and therefore safe. The mind often prefers pain it recognizes over pleasure it doesn't. Complimenting yourself, allowing mistakes, or embracing imperfection feels strange, even risky. The nervous system resists it because it's unknown territory. That's why breaking the habit feels uncomfortable at first. You're literally rewiring survival patterns. But here's the secret: the voice isn't truth. It's a loop. Thought creating emotion, emotion reinforcing thought. Awareness is the first break. When you catch yourself saying, "I'm such an idiot," pause, ask, "Am I criticizing behavior or identity?" Then take a breath and separate yourself from the judgment. Observation interrupts the automatic pathway and weakens the loop. Step 2 is self-compassion, which isn't about letting yourself off the hook. It's about responding to the inner voice with curiosity instead of attack. When you stumble, instead of, "I failed again," try, "I made a mistake," and that's part of learning. Even tiny reframes send a signal to the brain the habit doesn't have to define reality. You can redirect the loop. Step 3 is repetition. The critic is strong because it's practiced. Every time you choose awareness and compassion over attack, you weaken the automatic response. Neural pathways are rewired through consistent experience. Small shifts accumulate, and eventually, the voice loses its authority. The same situation that used to trigger rage against yourself now triggers reflection, or at least neutrality. Here's the fascinating thing: the self-criticism habit actually hijacks motivation. When you start interrupting it, you don't just feel lighter, you perform better. Anxiety decreases, focus increases, and the energy you spent on self-punishment is freed for creativity, problem solving, and connection. You realize motivation doesn't require cruelty. It thrives on clarity and presence. And here's something most people miss: the habit isn't just mental. It lives in the body. Tight shoulders, clenched jaw, shallow breathing, tension in the chest. These are the physiological markers of self-attack. That's why mindfulness and embodiment practices accelerate change. Noticing the sensation of self-criticism in your body lets you intervene before it spirals into thought and behavior. Breaking the habit isn't about silencing the critic completely. It's about regaining choice. You acknowledge the voice without obeying it. You listen without agreeing. You notice the patterns without letting them dominate your narrative. And every time you do, you expand the space between thought and reaction. That's where freedom lies. Eventually, the inner voice doesn't vanish, it just loses its edge. Mistakes are no longer existential threats. Setbacks are data points, not indictments. You start talking to yourself the way you'd talk to someone you care about, not someone you need to control. And once that happens, the habit stops being a driver of your life and becomes a quiet observer, informative, not destructive. Because the truth is, self-criticism isn't motivation, it's habit, and habits can be retrained. The voice isn't you. It's a loop you inherited and practiced. And the moment you start observing, reframing, and redirecting it, you stop living under attack and start living in choice. That's not just freedom. That's transformation. Pattern interruption. Have you ever felt trapped in the same mental cycles doing the same things over and over, and wondering why nothing seems to change. You make a decision, follow through for a few days, and then somehow your old habits pull you back, like you never left. That's how patterns work. Your brain loves repetition, even when it doesn't serve you, but there's a way out. It's called pattern interruption, and it's one of the most powerful ways to reclaim control over your mind. Patterns exist because your brain is lazy in the best possible way. It looks for efficiency, and repetition is efficiency. Every thought, emotion, and action you repeat creates a neural pathway. The more you travel it, the easier it gets to follow. That's why habits feel automatic. Your mind doesn't think it's making choices. It's following tracks it already laid. You feel stuck, but really you're just comfortable. The same loops that saved energy once are now holding you back. The tricky part is how subtle these patterns are. You might think you're making a conscious decision, but if it matches an old loop, your brain treats it like autopilot. Emotional reactions, self-talk, behavior, even relationships. They can all become unconscious loops. You repeat them because it's familiar, not because it works. That's why trying to change through willpower alone rarely works. You're fighting a machine designed to resist change. Pattern interruption works by creating a shock in the system. It's a deliberate disruption, a way to break the automatic flow so your mind can notice itself. It doesn't have to be dramatic. Sometimes it's as simple as taking a new route home, speaking up when you usually stay quiet, or changing the order of your morning routine. The point isn't novelty for its own sake. It's forcing the brain out of autopilot long enough to create awareness. Awareness is the critical piece. You can't fix what you don't see. Most habits are invisible because they're unconscious. Pattern interruption brings them into the light. When you do something unexpected, your nervous system registers. Wait, that's different. That tiny disruption makes space for choice. Suddenly, you can see the loop and decide whether to continue it or redirect. This technique works because of how the brain processes novelty. New experiences trigger dopamine and alertness. Your mind becomes more flexible. That's why even small interruptions feel invigorating. They create energy and attention. And when that energy pairs with conscious choice, new neural pathways start forming. You're literally rewiring your brain while interrupting your old habit. But here's the catch: interruption alone doesn't create lasting change. You have to replace the old pattern with a different response. Breaking a loop without building a new one leaves your brain unsettled, which often leads it back to the old behavior. True transformation happens when pattern interruption is paired with intentional action. You disrupt the habit, notice it, and then choose a different, healthier response. Over time, the new loop strengthens and the old one fades. This is why small, deliberate changes matter more than grand gestures. You don't have to overhaul your life in a day. You just need to interrupt key moments that reinforce old patterns. A pause before reacting. A conscious breath before scrolling. A different action when faced with stress. Those micro interruptions are enough to shift your neural pathways if repeated consistently. Pattern interruption also works on emotional and cognitive loops. The moment you feel yourself spiraling into worry, shame, or self-doubt, do something that forces your mind into presence. Clap your hands, step outside, name 5 things around you. It doesn't suppress the thought. It temporarily suspends the autopilot so you can choose how to respond. That pause is where freedom begins. And here's what most people miss. The power of pattern interruption isn't just about stopping bad habits. It's about reclaiming choice in every area of life. Once you see how automatic much of your mind is, you realize how many decisions are just old patterns running the show. Interrupting them is like flipping a switch. Suddenly you're not a passenger anymore. You're the driver. The most effective interruptions are those that challenge both body and mind. Movement, speech, sensory change, anything that makes your brain notice the present moment. That's why routines that combine physical and mental shifts, like shaking your body while affirming a new thought, or writing a different response to a recurring worry, are so powerful. They force the system to update its internal map. Over time, pattern interruption becomes a skill. You start spotting loops before they trap you. You learn to intervene quickly, preventing old habits from taking control. And the more you practice, the less effort it takes. The brain gradually learns that disruption isn't threatening, it's a tool. You're not sabotaging yourself, you're teaching yourself how to act with awareness. Ultimately, pattern interruption is about breaking automaticity. It's about creating the space where conscious choice can thrive. Every habit you interrupt, every loop you notice, every new response you practice, that's freedom being encoded into your nervous system. It's the bridge between who you are by default and who you can become by design. Because the truth is, your life isn't defined by the loops you were born with or the habits you learned. It's defined by the moments you choose to interrupt them, notice them, and redirect them. Pattern interruption isn't just a technique. It's a doorway, and once you step through, you start seeing every old habit not as a limit, but as an opportunity to build something new. The illusion of control. Have you ever felt like you should be in control of everything? Like if you just try hard enough, plan carefully enough, or anticipate every outcome, you can shape life exactly the way you want it. It feels responsible, rational, even admirable. But here's the truth. That sense of control is mostly an illusion, and believing it's real quietly shapes almost every choice you make, every fear you feel, every disappointment that hits you. The illusion of control starts with the mind's obsession with predictability. Your brain is a pattern-seeking machine. It wants certainty. It wants to reduce risk, avoid pain, and maximize reward. So it exaggerates your influence over events. You plan, organize, and strategize, and every time something works out, your brain whispers, "See, you did this. You're in control." That reinforcement makes you cling to control even harder, even when randomness is doing most of the work. Here's where it gets sneaky. The more you chase control, the more anxiety it produces, because life is inherently unpredictable. People change. Systems fail. Emotions fluctuate. No matter how precise your planning, the world pushes back. And when reality doesn't match expectation, your mind interprets it as failure. You feel stressed, frustrated, or powerless, even though the only thing failing is your belief that you ever had full control. The illusion also fuels compulsive behavior, micromanaging, over-planning, constant checking, seeking reassurance. These are all attempts to enforce a fantasy of control. Your mind thinks that by doing more, monitoring more, predicting more, it can prevent mistakes or pain. But the paradox is, the tighter you grip, the more life resists, and the more your nervous system remains in a state of tension. Control becomes a treadmill, exhausting both body and mind. Psychology shows that this isn't just a personality flaw. Humans evolved to overestimate their influence because it was adaptive. Taking initiative increased survival, made you notice opportunities, and helped manage risk. But evolution never accounted for a modern world where most outcomes are influenced by complex systems beyond your direct control. The brain's hardwired overconfidence is now misfiring, producing stress instead of safety. What's even trickier is how control interacts with identity. You start tying your self-worth to outcomes. If you succeed, it proves you're competent. If you fail, it proves you're inadequate. You don't see that luck, timing, or the contributions of others are just as responsible for results as your effort. That's why the illusion of control can be so painful. It magnifies disappointment and guilt when life inevitably deviates from plan. The secret to escaping the trap isn't abandoning effort. It's distinguishing between influence and control. Influence is where you can shape outcomes. Control is the myth that you can shape all of them. When you focus on influence, you take responsibility for your actions without attaching your identity to the unpredictable elements beyond your reach. That subtle shift frees mental energy, reduces anxiety, and increases actual effectiveness. Mindfulness highlights this beautifully. By noticing thoughts, feelings, and impulses without clinging, you learn that outcomes are often probabilistic. You can act with care and intention, but you don't have to obsess over certainty. The moment you accept that unpredictability is normal, the nervous system stops resisting, and a sense of spaciousness emerges. You're still active in life, but not desperate to control it. The illusion also shapes emotional responses. When you feel powerless, it's not just reality hitting you. It's your brain punishing itself for failing to maintain a fantasy of control. Anxiety, anger, frustration. These are often symptoms of clinging too tightly. When you loosen the grip, even slightly, life stops feeling like a battlefield and starts feeling like a flow. Your reactions become choices rather than compulsions. Here's a simple practice. Notice where you're over-controlling in daily life. Checklists, compulsive monitoring, endless planning, or trying to predict outcomes. Ask yourself, what part of this can I actually influence, and what part am I pretending to control? That pause interrupts the automatic loop of control seeking and introduces clarity. You keep action where it's useful and release the rest. The real freedom comes from embracing uncertainty. The moment you stop believing you can dictate everything, you stop punishing yourself for imperfection. You stop tying your worth to results beyond your reach. And ironically, the less you cling, the more effective you become, because your mind and body aren't trapped in tension. Presence replaces obsession. Awareness replaces anxiety. Flow replaces force. The illusion of control isn't a flaw in your character. It's a built-in mechanism that once helped humans survive. But today it's mostly a trap, convincing you that life should bend to your will when most of it won't. Recognizing it is the first step toward liberation. Once you see it for what it is, you can act with influence, accept uncertainty, and finally stop mistaking rigidity for mastery. Because the truth is, life is not meant to be controlled. It's meant to be navigated. And the sooner you realize you've been holding on to an illusion, the sooner you can stop exhausting yourself chasing certainty that never existed and start flowing with the reality that does. Emotional suppression. Have you ever caught yourself pushing a feeling down because it seemed inconvenient, uncomfortable, or wrong? Maybe it was anger at a friend, sadness after a loss, or fear in a situation where you felt exposed. You swallow it, distract yourself, or plaster on a smile, thinking if you ignore it, it will go away. But here's the truth. That habit of emotional suppression doesn't make you stronger. It quietly reshapes your mind, body, and behavior in ways you barely notice. Emotional suppression starts innocently. As children, we learn quickly that some feelings aren't safe to express. Crying might get scolded, anger might get punished, fear might get dismissed, so we tuck them away, sometimes without even realizing it. The lesson is simple: show less, survive more. And it works, at first. The tears dry, the outburst fades, and people keep loving you. Your nervous system learns that hiding emotion is safer than expressing it. But here's the catch: emotions are energy. They don't just vanish when you ignore them. Sadness, anger, fear, excitement, they all have to move through the body. Suppression locks them in. That energy gets recycled as tension, stress, or anxiety. You think you're coping, but really, you're storing potential explosions of emotion like a pressure cooker. Over time, the body starts carrying emotional weight in muscles, breathing patterns, and even posture. Emotional suppression isn't just a mental habit. It's a physiological imprint. And it rewires your brain too. Studies show that habitually suppressing emotion increases activity in the amygdala, your emotional alarm center, while reducing activity in the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that regulates responses. In other words, the more you suppress, the more reactive you become. Your mind grows less flexible, less resilient, more prone to automatic stress reactions. Suppression feels like control, but it actually amplifies emotional intensity underneath the surface. The irony is that suppression is self-perpetuating. The more you hide, the more fear grows that showing emotion will be unsafe. The more you ignore anger, sadness, or fear, the louder it shouts inside. That internal pressure makes you even more likely to suppress next time. It's a loop. You believe you're protecting yourself, but really, you're training your mind to resist life instead of feeling it. And here's where it gets subtle but devastating. Emotional suppression shapes behavior. People who habitually suppress tend to avoid confrontation, intimacy, and authenticity. Relationships feel shallow because the real reactions never surface. Creativity diminishes because passion gets muted. You might feel like you're keeping it together, but inside, there's a simmering storm that leaks into stress, exhaustion, or sudden outbursts. Suppression disguises itself as composure, but it comes at a hidden cost. Breaking the habit isn't about losing control or becoming reactive. It's about recognition and integration. The first step is noticing when you're shutting down your feelings. Where in the body do you feel tension? Where do you avoid looking inward, even naming the emotion? I'm feeling anger. I'm feeling sadness. Interrupts the automatic suppression loop. Awareness is the crack in the dam. Next is allowing the emotion to move safely. That doesn't mean lashing out or making rash decisions. It means acknowledging it, feeling it, and letting it express in a contained way. Journaling, speaking to a trusted person, or even physical movement like exercise or shaking out tension. When the emotion is allowed to flow, the nervous system registers release and safety. The brain learns that feelings are signals, not threats. Here's the fascinating thing: once you stop suppressing, emotional intelligence skyrockets. You become more resilient, more attuned to yourself and others. Decision-making improves because emotions become information instead of obstacles. Relationships deepen because you can communicate authentically. Even stress diminishes because the body isn't carrying unprocessed tension. Suppression feels like protection, but allowing emotion is freedom. And here's the hidden bonus. The more you practice conscious emotional expression, the less intense extreme emotions feel. Anger isn't explosive, sadness isn't paralyzing, anxiety isn't overwhelming. That's because the nervous system no longer treats emotion as dangerous. It learns that energy can move, that feelings can exist without dictating identity, and that life can be experienced fully without fear of being consumed by emotion. Most people spend decades suppressing without noticing the long-term impact. They assume strength is silence or stoicism, but real strength is fluidity. It's feeling fully, responding consciously, and integrating experience without losing control. Suppression isn't strength. It's a shadow habit that limits vitality, creativity, and connection. The truth is, emotions want to be lived, not hidden. They are data, not defects. They are signals, not punishments. And the moment you allow them into awareness, even just a little at a time, the pressure lifts, clarity emerges, and life feels larger, richer, and more authentic. Emotional suppression isn't a life hack. It's a habit that builds quiet prisons, and the only way out is to stop pretending feelings are optional. Start noticing, start naming, start moving. Because the liberation you're looking for isn't in controlling emotion. It's in letting it breathe. The comparison cycle. Have you ever noticed how quickly a single glance at someone else's life can spiral into a storm of doubt, envy, or inadequacy? You see their success, their beauty, their freedom, and suddenly your own accomplishments feel small, your own life feels lacking. That's the comparison cycle, a hidden habit that hijacks your mind, making you measure yourself against others instead of living your own life. It starts innocently. A social media scroll, a casual conversation, a coworker's promotion, and your mind instantly begins to assess, measure, and rank. You compare your life to theirs and judge yourself against an ideal that may not even exist. That initial thought sparks emotion, envy, shame, anxiety, and suddenly the cycle locks in. The thought and emotion feed each other, strengthening the habit. Here's the problems. Comparison is never neutral. The brain interprets it as a signal of threat. Seeing someone else succeed triggers the same regions of the brain as experiencing social pain. That's why comparison feels uncomfortable. Your nervous system treats it as danger, as a signal that your social value is at risk. That emotional charge is what keeps the cycle spinning. You can't just think your way out because your body believes you're under attack. And it's not just a mental habit. It's physiological. Cortisol spikes. Heart rate rises. Stress mounts. You feel restless, distracted, and insecure. Yet most people continue feeding the cycle because it feels familiar. Like emotional suppression, comparison hijacks your brain by presenting discomfort as information. The mind believes it's helping you improve, when in reality it's reinforcing self-doubt. The comparison cycle thrives because of selective attention. Your brain is excellent at spotting what you don't have and minimizing what you do have. Someone's highlight reel becomes your reality. You ignore the struggles behind their success and exaggerate your own shortcomings. The more you engage in this habit, the more distorted your perception of self becomes. You're chasing standards that exist only in fragments and curated stories. And the cycle is self-reinforcing. You compare, feel inadequate, try to fix it, fail to feel better, and compare again. Every repetition strengthens the neural pathway, making the habit automatic, even when you consciously tell yourself, I shouldn't compare. The brain has learned the pattern so well that the emotional pull is immediate and powerful. It's a loop you're wired to repeat unless you intervene. Breaking the cycle isn't about avoiding comparison entirely. That's impossible in a social world. It's about awareness and choice. Step 1 is noticing when the thought arises. I'm comparing myself to them. Just naming it interrupts the autopilot. Step 2 is shifting perspective. Ask, what can I learn from this observation without judging myself? Or, does this comparison reflect the full reality? Step 3 is refocusing on your own path. Measurement doesn't equal growth, presence does. The real trick is recanneling the energy. Comparison triggers motivation, but unbridled, it fuels anxiety. If you redirect it consciously, it can inspire without undermining you. Study the person you admire, extract lessons, and apply them in ways that honor your unique circumstances. That's how the nervous system learns to process observation as information, not judgment. There's also a deeper truth the cycle masks: your worth is not relative. Comparison convinces you that value is measured externally by others' lives, successes, or appearances. But real self-worth is internal, cultivated through recognition of effort, progress, and alignment with your own values. The moment you internalize that, the pull of the cycle weakens. You see others without needing to rank yourself against them. And here's the paradox: the more you stop comparing, the more effective you become. You stop wasting mental energy on self-critique, distraction, and envy. You start focusing on actions that actually matter, on growth that's meaningful to you, and the nervous system relaxes. Productivity, creativity, and satisfaction naturally rise when you step out of the comparison loop. But stepping out requires consistency. The first interruption is awkward. Your mind will resist. It will whisper, but look at them again just to check. That's normal. The habit is powerful because it evolved as a survival mechanism, measuring status, safety, and competence relative to others. You're retraining biology, not just psychology. Repetition builds new pathways, weakening the old loop. Eventually, what happens is subtle but profound. You can notice others' achievements and feel inspired without feeling diminished. You stop comparing in ways that hurt. Gratitude for your own journey becomes natural. Confidence grows quietly because it's grounded in internal metrics rather than external validation. The comparison cycle isn't just a mental nuisance. It's a lens that shapes how you experience life. Left unchecked, it distorts perception, hijacks emotions, and limits potential. But once you notice it, interrupt it, and redirect it, the habit that once trapped you becomes a tool instead of a chain. Because the truth is, your path is yours alone. Others' lives aren't benchmarks. They're just data points. And the moment you live by that truth, the cycle loses its power, and you finally step fully into your own story. The familiarity trap. You ever notice how easy it is to stay in situations, thoughts, or routines that don't really serve you just because they feel familiar? You know the ones. The dead-end jobs, unfulfilling relationships, or even recurring negative thought patterns. You tell yourself, I'll change later, or this is just how I am, and you settle into the comfort of the known. That's the familiarity trap. The hidden mental habit that keeps you stuck while convincing you it's safe. It's deceptively simple. The brain craves predictability. It evolved to prioritize what's familiar because familiarity signals safety. New experiences, ideas, or behaviors are inherently risky. So when you try something different, even if it's better, The mind lights up with alarm. Your nervous system releases stress hormones, your body tenses, and suddenly you feel that pull back toward the known. The comfort of sameness feels like survival. The tricky part is how this habit disguises itself as reason. You rationalize staying put. I'm comfortable. It's not so bad. I know what I'm getting. But underneath, the brain is just avoiding uncertainty. That familiar pain feels safer than the unknown possibility of growth. Even when you consciously want change, your automatic systems subtly sabotage your efforts. You end up choosing the old path because it's easier than facing the discomfort of novelty. And it's not just behaviors. It shows up in thinking too. Negative beliefs, self-criticism, and limiting assumptions become cozy because they're familiar. You've repeated them so often that your mind treats them like truth. Every time you encounter evidence that contradicts them, the familiarity bias whispers, "That doesn't feel right, that's not normal." You ignore the new data and cling to what feels known. Familiarity traps can be especially powerful in relationships. People stay with partners who don't lift them up because they've learned the rhythm of conflict, the predictability of tension, or even the pattern of neglect. It's safer to keep the old dynamic than risk the unknown of independence or a different kind of connection. Comfort and routine masquerade as love, security, or loyalty, when really they're just resistance to change. Even habits that seem positive can become traps if they're just familiar patterns without growth. You may meditate, exercise, or work hard, but if you're doing it out of autopilot rather than curiosity or purpose, you're still stuck in repetition. The brain loves rituals, but it doesn't always distinguish between beneficial and limiting loops. Familiarity is neutral. The trap is believing comfort equals progress. Breaking the familiarity trap isn't about throwing yourself into chaos. It's about introducing deliberate novelty in small doses. A new route to work, a different morning routine, a conversation with someone outside your usual circle. Each tiny disruption creates a window of awareness. It jolts your nervous system just enough to notice automatic behavior without overwhelming it. Awareness is the first crack in the trap. The next step is embracing discomfort as a signal, not a threat. That tension you feel when trying something new isn't your mind failing. It's the nervous system updating. Growth requires this temporary instability. The more you practice leaning into discomfort, the more your brain learns that the unknown isn't dangerous. It's a source of expansion. Here's where most people struggle. They mistake familiarity for identity. "I've always been this way," or "this is just how life is," become internalized scripts that resist change. But identity is fluid. It's constructed through repeated experiences, not fixed labels. Every time you act against the pull of familiarity, you rewrite the narrative of who you are. Familiarity traps are subtle because they feel safe, even satisfying. They make you feel competent, predictable, and in control, even while limiting your potential. The key is recognizing that comfort is not the same as growth, and stability is not the same as fulfillment. The moment you see that distinction, the trap loses its power. Small, consistent disruptions build courage and autonomy. The first step might feel uncomfortable or even frightening, but it teaches your brain a new rule. Unfamiliar doesn't mean unsafe. Gradually, you expand your tolerance for uncertainty. You discover creativity, resilience, and capacity you didn't realize you had because the nervous system finally lets go of the old script. The irony is that freedom lies on the other side of discomfort. Familiarity feels secure, but it's a cage. Growth, exploration, and transformation feel risky, but they open possibilities. The more you practice leaning into the unknown, the less familiar patterns control your choices. You start to act from curiosity rather than habit, from presence rather than autopilot. The familiarity trap isn't something you conquer once. It's a constant tension. Life will always present familiar loops that feel easier than change. But every moment you notice the pull, question it, and choose differently, you chip away at the cage. Over time, your choices align more with your potential than your comfort zone. Because the truth is, familiarity is seductive, but it's rarely liberating. Real growth doesn't happen in the known. It happens when you dare to step into what feels strange, uncertain, or risky. And every step into the unfamiliar rewires your mind, expands your identity, and frees you from the invisible habit that keeps you small. Comfort zone addiction. Have you ever wondered why it feels almost impossible to make the changes you know would improve your life? You set goals, make plans, and get motivated, and yet somehow you end up right back where you started. That's not laziness. That's comfort zone addiction, a subtle mental habit that convinces you that staying safe, predictable, and familiar is better than taking the risks that lead to growth. It starts innocently. Comfort feels good. Your body relaxes. Stress drops. You know what to expect, so the nervous system doesn't have to work as hard. That feeling of ease becomes addictive. Your brain interprets familiarity as safety and safety as reward. So over time, staying in the comfort zone isn't just a preference. It becomes a compulsion. You actively avoid situations that might challenge you, even when you consciously want change. The trap is how sneaky it is. Comfort zone addiction doesn't look like addiction at first. You tell yourself, I'll start tomorrow, or I'm just being responsible, or I don't have time. But each delay reinforces the loop. Your brain stores the experience of staying safe as proof that the familiar path is correct. The pull toward ease becomes automatic, and effortful growth feels scary, exhausting, or unnecessary. And it's not just about avoiding external challenges. Comfort zones extend into thoughts, beliefs, and emotions. You stick to familiar patterns of thinking, even when they're limiting. You replay the same worries, doubts, or narratives because they're predictable. You avoid feelings like discomfort, embarrassment, or fear because your nervous system interprets them as danger. Comfort zone addiction is as much mental and emotional as it is physical. The irony is that the comfort zone feels safe, but it's actually limiting. It creates a kind of slow stagnation. Goals feel distant, potential goes untapped, and life becomes a series of routines that feel secure but empty. The brain prefers this predictable discomfort over the unknown possibility of growth. It's the paradox: you stay safe and lose freedom, creativity, and fulfillment. Breaking the habit isn't about brute willpower. Your nervous system will resist. It craves the familiar loop. The key is small, deliberate disruptions that push the edges of your zone without overwhelming your system. Take one step that feels slightly uncomfortable. Speak up when you'd usually stay quiet. Try something new in your routine. Each micro challenge teaches your brain that uncertainty isn't dangerous. It's tolerable and even rewarding. Awareness is crucial. Start noticing where you're avoiding growth simply because it feels uncomfortable. Journaling, reflection, or mindfulness can reveal patterns you weren't conscious of. Often the most insidious comfort zones are invisible. You think you're making rational decisions, but really you're acting on autopilot. protecting yourself from risk that's mostly imagined. Over time, the brain adapts. Every time you step slightly beyond your comfort zone, your neural pathways rewire. Discomfort starts to feel manageable. Confidence grows not because you've mastered the world, but because you've trained yourself to tolerate uncertainty, to experience fear without being paralyzed by it. Your comfort zone expands naturally, and what once felt impossible now feels approachable. The habit is powerful because it masquerades as self-preservation. You think you're avoiding pain, but really you're avoiding growth. The brain prefers minor, predictable discomfort over the unknown potential for better outcomes. Comfort zone addiction thrives in delayed gratification, fear of failure, and overvaluation of ease. It's quiet, subtle, and persistent. The perfect mental trap. The most effective way to dismantle it is through incremental exposure paired with reflection. You don't need to leap off a cliff to escape your comfort zone. You just need to take one small, intentional step beyond what feels safe, notice the outcome, and repeat. Each act of deliberate discomfort weakens the neural pathway of avoidance and strengthens the pathway for courage, flexibility, and growth. Eventually, something remarkable happens. The nervous system no longer resists change as strongly. Challenges feel invigorating instead of threatening. You start seeking novelty instead of avoiding it. Fear still exists, but it doesn't dominate your choices. The pull of comfort is still there, but it's no longer automatic. You decide when to follow it and when to move beyond. Comfort zone addiction isn't about laziness, weakness, or lack of willpower. It's a neurological habit designed to protect you, misfiring in a world where growth requires risk. Recognizing it, observing it, and gradually stepping beyond it is the only way to reclaim your potential. Every small step rewires your brain, expands your capacity, and teaches you that real safety lies not in avoidance, but in conscious engagement with life. Because the truth is, comfort will always feel good, but it will never lead to fulfillment. Freedom, growth, and mastery lie beyond the edge of ease. The moment you stop letting comfort dictate your choices, the addiction loses its grip, and life becomes bigger, bolder, and more fully yours. Micro-decisions. Have you ever thought about how much of your life is actually controlled by tiny choices you barely notice? What you eat, how long you scroll, whether you respond with patience or irritation, what you pay attention to. These are micro-decisions. They feel insignificant in the moment, but over time, they shape habits, personality, and the trajectory of your entire life. Micro-decisions are invisible architects, quietly building the version of you that shows up every day. The wild part is how automatic they are. Most micro-decisions happen without conscious thought. Your brain runs on autopilot to save energy, so it makes thousands of little choices every day based on past patterns, shortcuts, and what feels easiest. That's why you keep doing the same routines, thinking you're just living, when really your unconscious choices are designing your life for you. And here's the kicker. Even small decisions carry exponential power. Skipping a workout today seems trivial, but repeated over months, it rewires your health and confidence. Checking social media first thing in the morning seems harmless, but repeated it trains your brain for distraction, dopamine dependency, and a fragmented attention span. Every little choice compounds, quietly shaping reality in ways most people never notice. Micro-decisions aren't just about actions. They're about thoughts too. Every time you choose to dwell on a worry instead of redirecting attention, you strengthen neural pathways for anxiety. Every time you choose gratitude, curiosity, or patience, you strengthen pathways for resilience and clarity. Your mind doesn't separate small mental choices from big ones. It simply encodes repetition, and repetition becomes identity. The reason micro decisions feel harmless is because their impact is delayed. You don't see the effect immediately. One extra hour of scrolling doesn't feel like it changes your life. One skipped workout or one indulgent snack doesn't feel catastrophic. But when those micro decisions accumulate day after day, week after week, the life you've built reflects them more than your big, heroic efforts ever could. Here's where most people get it wrong. They focus on dramatic change instead of daily consistency. They wait for motivation, big plans, or perfect timing. But transformation is rarely the result of massive, singular acts. It's the aggregation of tiny, repeated decisions. The quality of your life is not determined by the extraordinary moments, but by the micro decisions that precede them. Awareness is the first step. Start noticing the small choices you make unconsciously. What do you check first thing in the morning? How do you respond when someone irritates you? What thoughts do you let loop in your mind? Observing these micro decisions shines a light on the hidden patterns shaping your day and your identity. The second step is conscious intervention. Once you notice, you can redirect. Take one small action differently. Respond with patience instead of irritation. Choose movement instead of scrolling. Pause before a habitual reaction. The key is incremental adjustment. You don't need to overhaul your life in a single moment. You just need to interrupt the autopilot of the day-to-day choices. Micro decisions also reveal a fascinating truth about freedom. Even when circumstances feel limiting, you always have tiny choices. You can't control everything, external events, other people, or luck. But you can control how you respond, where you focus, and what you repeat. Those micro decisions accumulate into control over the only thing you truly own: yourself. And here's the most powerful part: awareness of micro decisions creates momentum. Small wins compound, building confidence, clarity, and discipline. One conscious choice leads to another. Patterns shift. The brain begins to favor action aligned with intention rather than autopilot. Over time, those tiny, deliberate decisions become automatic, but this time they work for you instead of against you. The irony is that life-changing outcomes often feel effortless when they're actually the product of countless micro decisions. The habits, energy, and clarity you see in successful, fulfilled people are rarely the result of one bold move. They're the accumulation of tiny, intentional choices repeated consistently over months and years. So the next time you think a decision is too small to matter, remember it's not the scale of the choice, it's the frequency and consistency that matters. Micro decisions are the hidden architecture of your life, silently building the person you are and the life you live. Change them consciously, and you change everything. Because the truth is, life isn't built in grand gestures, it's built in moments. Tiny, invisible, repeated moments. And every time you make one consciously, you're sculpting the trajectory of your future. Automated identity. Have you ever noticed how much of who you think you are feels automatic? The routines you follow, the reactions you have, the way you talk to yourself. Much of it happens without conscious thought. That's the essence of automated identity. The mental habit of letting past patterns and repeated behaviors define who you are without realizing it. It's subtle, invisible, and incredibly powerful. Automated identity starts innocently. You try something once, It works or feels familiar, and your brain files it away. Then you do it again and again. Eventually, repetition turns action into default behavior. Your mind stops asking, "Do I want this?" and starts assuming, "This is who I am." Before you know it, routines, habits, and reactions become identity statements, whether you consciously intended them to or not. The danger is how limiting it can be. Once a behavior or belief becomes automated, it reinforces itself. You act in ways that fit the identity, and your experiences confirm it. If you've labeled yourself as shy, you unconsciously avoid social situations, and the avoidance strengthens the "I'm shy" belief. If you've labeled yourself as unmotivated, you skip small steps toward your goals, reinforcing the identity of laziness. It's a loop. The automated behavior produces the reality that justifies the identity. The mind doesn't question automated identities because they feel familiar and safe. Your nervous system prefers predictability over change. Even when you consciously want to evolve, the autopilot of identity pulls you back to what you've always been. Comfort, habit, and repetition combine to keep the automated self in place, quietly steering your choices without your permission. This habit shows up in thought patterns too. Self-talk, mental scripts, and recurring narratives feed the automated identity. The more you repeat, "I'm bad at this," "I'm not creative," or "I'm not capable," the more your brain encodes those statements as reality. Neural pathways form. Emotions reinforce the thoughts, and the behavior aligns. The automated identity becomes both the source and the result of your daily experience. The tricky part is how invisible it is. You often mistake it for authenticity, believing that your default reactions, thoughts, and behaviors are just who you are. But most automated identity is a product of history, habits, social conditioning, past choices, not a fixed truth. You're not bound to it, but the longer it runs unexamined, the more it feels like destiny. Breaking the pattern requires awareness. Step 1 is noticing the scripts and behaviors you repeat without thought. Where do you act automatically? What beliefs guide your choices without questioning? Just observing these loops introduces the possibility of change. Awareness is the crack in the machinery of automatic identity. Step 2 is deliberate intervention. Start making small choices that contradict the automated self. Speak up when you normally stay quiet. Take action when the automated self would procrastinate. Challenge recurring beliefs with evidence from your actual experience. These micro acts disrupt the loop and begin forming new neural pathways, slowly building a more flexible identity. Step 3 is repetition. The automated self is strong because it's been practiced relentlessly. Changing it requires consistent, intentional action over time. Each new choice, reinforced with awareness, strengthens the emerging identity and weakens the old patterns. Eventually, the new behaviors become automatic, but this time they serve you rather than constrain you. Automated identity also explains why growth can feel uncomfortable. Your nervous system resists change because it's trained to default to the familiar self. Stepping into new behaviors, thoughts, or ways of being creates temporary tension, stress, or fear. That discomfort isn't a signal to stop. It's a signal that the old patterns are being challenged. Growth lives in that space. The profound truth is that identity is fluid. Who you are is not fixed by your past, habits, or thoughts. It's built moment by moment through repeated choices. Automated identity is just the default setting, but it can be reprogrammed. Conscious attention, intentional action, and consistency allow you to shift from a self dictated by habit to a self defined by choice. The irony is that the more you intervene in your automated patterns, the more effortless life becomes. The nervous system learns that new behaviors are safe, thought loops adjust, and emotions realign. What once required effort gradually becomes your default. A new automated identity that works for you instead of against you. Because the truth is, your identity is not something you inherit or stumble into. It's something you build, habit by habit, thought by thought, choice by choice. Automated identity is powerful because it's invisible, but once you notice it, you gain the ability to redesign the very foundation of who you are. Confirmation bias. Think about the last time you argued with someone, maybe about politics, relationships, or even something as small as which movie was better. You probably noticed how easy it was to find reasons you were right and how obvious it seemed that they were wrong. That's not logic. That's confirmation bias, one of the most powerful and invisible mental habits shaping how you see the world. It's not just an intellectual glitch. It's an emotional safety mechanism, a psychological shield that protects your identity and worldview from anything that threatens it. Here's how it works. Your brain is constantly flooded with information, too much to process all at once. So it takes shortcuts. It looks for patterns, familiar ideas, and evidence that confirms what you already believe. Anything that challenges your view feels uncomfortable, even dangerous. So you automatically dismiss it, distort it, or ignore it altogether. That's confirmation bias, the hidden filter deciding what's true, what's false, and what's worth noticing. What's wild is that this happens long before you're aware of it. Studies show that when you encounter evidence that supports your beliefs, your brain releases dopamine, the same neurotransmitter tied to pleasure and reward. Being right literally feels good, but when something threatens your belief, the brain interprets it as pain. That emotional discomfort makes you defend your position, not because it's logical, but because it feels safer. This is why people get trapped in echo chambers, not just online, but in their own heads. You surround yourself with information that aligns with what you already think, people who validate your perspective, and content that reinforces your worldview. It feels empowering, but really it's just confirmation bias feeding itself. You're not exploring reality. You're reinforcing your comfort zone. And it doesn't just affect opinions. It shapes your entire perception of self. If you believe you're unlucky, your brain notices every setback and ignores every small victory. If you believe you're not good enough, you interpret neutral feedback as criticism and dismiss praise as meaningless. Confirmation bias keeps your identity locked in place by filtering the world through the lens of your existing story. It even distorts memory. You don't remember events objectively. You remember them in ways that support your beliefs. If you see yourself as a failure, your brain highlights every moment that confirms that narrative and blurs out the times you succeeded. Your past becomes edited proof that your self-image is true, even when it's not. The irony is that confirmation bias gives the illusion of certainty while quietly eroding truth. It convinces you that your perspective is reality, even when it's just one narrow slice of it. It makes you feel confident in your conclusions, which is why it's so hard to notice. You're not aware that you're filtering. It feels like you're simply seeing things as they are. So how do you break out of it? You don't eliminate confirmation bias completely. It's wired into human cognition. But you can learn to work with it instead of being controlled by it. The first step is humility, admitting that your perception isn't objective. The moment you realize your mind is filtering reality, you gain power over the filter. The second step is curiosity. When you catch yourself defending a belief too quickly, pause. Ask, what evidence would actually change my mind? Or, what might I be missing? That question creates cognitive space, a tiny interruption in the automatic cycle of reinforcement. It doesn't mean you have to abandon your view, but it forces your brain to consider alternatives, which is where growth happens. The third step is exposure. Seek out information that challenges you. Listen to people you disagree with without trying to win the argument. Read or watch things that stretch your thinking. You don't have to accept everything you hear. The goal isn't to believe the opposite. It's to expand your awareness. Every time you expose yourself to disconfirming evidence, you weaken the grip of the bias a little more. But here's the deeper part most people miss: confirmation bias isn't just intellectual, it's emotional. The reason you resist being wrong is because being wrong feels like a threat to your identity. When you detach your self-worth from your opinions, being wrong stops feeling like danger and starts feeling like discovery. The most self-aware people aren't the ones who are always right. They're the ones who can be wrong without falling apart. Breaking confirmation bias isn't about changing what you believe. It's about changing how you relate to belief itself. You start seeing ideas as tools, not truths. Perspectives become experiments, not verdicts. You stop clinging to certainty and start exploring possibility. That's how mental flexibility grows. Not from collecting answers, but from questioning the lens that decides which answers you even see. Because the truth is, confirmation bias is a comfort mechanism pretending to be confidence. It feels safe, it feels logical, but it quietly narrows your reality. The moment you learn to question it, not destroy it, but dance with it, you open your mind to something far more valuable than being right, actually seeing clearly.